Hello everybody, welcome on into another stream. Hope you're doing well as always. So, on last night's stream, we watched a decent chunk of videos. We didn't get to the last one, which we'll start off with tonight. So we watched Radahn's Missing Lore Solved by the Discerning Tarnished. Then we followed that up with Zafe the Scholar's The Real Reason Radahn Stopped the Stars, Elden Ring Lore Theory and Speculation. Then we watched Mark Maxwell's How to Get Back into a Game According to Science. And my general answer for that now, after having thought about it more while watching the video, would be to probably watch like more gameplay or a stream if you need to kind of remember where you were, or if you need a little bit more motivation as to what was good about the game. But that's also contingent on if you truly want to get back into it or not. You might not actually get motivated from doing that after all. So anyway, after that, we finished things up with What Dark Souls Stole from the Bible by Infomercial, which I think is kind of a funny channel name to go with a title of a video like that. So that was yesterday's stream, and for the first video tonight, I have slated for us Videogames Have Terrible World Building by Adam Millard, the architect of games. Then I thought we'd do something a little bit different and actually look at some of that lore for Blasphemous, with Smoughtown's Blasphemous lore, the Twisted One with the Lore Hunter. Oh, and the Miracle by Smoughtown for Blasphemous lore. So I need to rearrange this stuff apparently. Dang it. Okay. So, nope. There we go. Then, so we'll do Video Games Have Terrible World Building, then Smoughtown's lore about the Miracle, then Smoughtown's podcasting with the Lore Hunter about the Twisted One of Blasphemous, then to potentially cap things off for the night, and we might get to another video after this, although I don't know what I would watch. We have Aging Untouchables, Creature Designer Deep Dive, BonfireVN by Adam Duff, Lucid Pixel, I suppose. So they are a game designer from my understanding, and they are just going to talk about what they think is cool and or like about that character design specifically. So I'm looking forward to that. So anyway, welcome back into the stream, everybody. We have Asinex, Levovit, Abriel Kurtz, welcome on in. I don't remember your name. Then we have Without Horns and Stella. How you guys doing? So, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and check out Video Games Have Terrible World Building by Adam Millard, the architect of games. Now, I kind of am... what's the word? Implied? Nope. Inclined. Inclined to agree with Adam a little bit here implicitly, just because a lot of games do... it's my dog. Do have terrible world building, but come on, boy. Come on. Thank you. Yeah, so a lot of games don't have the best world building, but I don't know if he's saying that they all do full stop, or specific games, or that they like need to do better in general. So we'll see how that goes. All right, here we go.
Video game worlds have come a long way in the last few decades, haven't they? Where once we were expected to believe that this teeny tiny castle, 4 houses and a shop, was somehow a sprawling metropolis, now games can conjure up entire full-scale cities for us to play in, decorated with crowds of people and more digital real estate than we could ever hope to explore. Once upon a time, the closest we got to a video game world that felt as varied and as packed with life as our real one was a slightly different floor tile set and a different colour of slime every few levels. But now, games can throw a seemingly
Although, to be fair, like way back in the day, you had text-based adventures. Now, actually, if we wanted to get really pedantic, could we actually call those a video game? Because they didn't really have videos. I would still be inclined to call them as much, but yeah. The stories are more like being more akin to a choose-your-own adventure book than like a stereotypical video game. But there was some really good stuff back then. Like one of the earliest, maybe not the earliest text-based games, but one of the earliest games in general would be the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, don't get me wrong, from what I understand of it, it was still esoteric as hell, and you kind of had to know like a lot of triggers, and it could potentially require like a lot of help or like troubleshooting to figure out what the next step in a like quest chain was, if you even want to call it a quest chain. But by all accounts and measures that I've heard of that game, it was actually ridiculously funny and pretty true to the source material as far as like the world building goes and whatnot. So anyway.
Endless variety of gorgeous photorealistic vistas at us, each filled with new and interesting creatures and places to look at. And where previously we had to make do with, at best, a sentence of backstory as to why we were even going on an adventure in the first place, something that usually amounted to, there is an evil wizard, kill him please, now video game worlds are so richly detailed and stuffed with story that their cutscenes alone rack up more runtime than a full TV series. Essentially, with every year that's gone by since their invention, video game settings and environments have only gotten bigger, more detailed, and increasingly visually impressive, with ever larger teams dedicated to the sole duty of bringing these digital spaces to life and making them somewhere where you actually want to spend your time. For a fan of world building like myself, you'd think that there's never been a better time to be into video games. Unfortunately, things are a bit more complex than that. Good world building is one of those things about games that's not particularly visible or flashy, but can do so much to elevate a title that's merely okay into something truly special, and
I definitely agree with that. I don't know if Final Fantasy VII Rebirth really hits that mark, or maybe I should say the remake. I would say that the remake for me kind of missed it, but Rebirth did a lot better, but that was well, I guess there's a lot more world to explore there. But anyway, I'll just continue on. I should probably stop tapping on this because I think I'm tapping on my HDMI cable and hitting and affecting the monitor. Anyway.
For people who are a bit confused by what I mean when I say world building, basically what I'm talking about is the construction not of a story, but of the fictional world that the story takes place in. If you've ever been really enjoying a good book or a TV show or a movie or whatever and realised that you aren't just into the narrative itself, but are fascinated by the setting and the history and the wider world of this fictional reality, then you've enjoyed some solid world building. Have you ever wanted to, I don't know, explore the nooks and crannies of the USS Enterprise, or wrap your head around the weirdly complicated history of Middle-earth, or have a go in Baron Harkonnen's big black bubble bath? All this stuff that's not directly relevant to what's happening in the plot, but serves to flesh out and enrich the time and place it's happening in, is all world building. And this...
Yeah, and for as many problems as an Amazon TV series is likely to have, there are aspects of the Wheel of Time series that I truly do enjoy. The cast and crew's attention to detail with regard to the world building. So, for example, this isn't exactly a spoiler by any means. When the story first starts out, it's essentially going to a tiny, tiny village in kind of the middle of nowhere. And the residents of the village kind of all look alike. And then one of the main characters pretty much does not look like anybody else in the village. But because he's essentially country bumpkin, he never really thinks about it or really thinks that he's that different, which kind of makes sense for a number of reasons. Like, one is kind of set in a medieval fantasy setting, and so it's not likely that most people are going to have looking glasses to look at themselves with, aka mirrors. So he probably doesn't spend a lot of time dwelling on his appearance, or just he might also just lack the context entirely to recognize that the people that he's surrounded by all have regional traits, because he might not even truly understand the concept of regions as far as what they imply beyond the word alone. So Asnex says, in the text game of Hitchhikers, early on you're given a chance to feed a dog a sandwich. Later on you're brought back to Earth on a tiny shrunken spaceship. Either way, the dog will eat. Oh no. Okay.
Behind-the-scenes narrative art could turn a mere investment in a single story into a fascination with an entire world, and video games are no different. The problem is, though, that for all the money, technology, and man-hours video games put into building worlds, they're still not very good at it. How many times have you found yourself groaning when a game's designated exposition dump character sits you down and rambles out some painfully unoriginal backstory you couldn't care less about that instantly goes in one ear and out the other? How many times have you been plonked in a city that took hundreds of people years to assemble and been unable to see it as anything other than a hollow artificial facade in front of a glorified menu that you can't wait to get away from? And
good old Destiny 2.
And perhaps worst of all, isn't it weird how despite decades of advancement in making gaming worlds look, sound, and behave more believably, it's often the ones with the most functional presentation and the sparsest writing that suck us in the most effectively. Essentially, for every video game with a compelling and well-realized setting, there are 100 generic, boring, and poorly conveyed ones lying in wait to ambush us with some frustratingly unrealized potential.
It kind of sucks to me that Mass Effect was just thrown onto that pile, because I unironically think Mass Effect number one was one of the best games that I've seen as far as like world building, or maybe not worlds building. Maybe it's like one of the best dramas that I've seen written into a video game. And part of the reason why I say that is because I was chilling with one of my friends in my college days, and a mutual friend of ours was watching him play Mass Effect, and our mutual friend pretty much had like no interest in video games beyond like sports games. And then like one day he asked my friend if he was going to play that space game again, and then he and I both started laughing because our friend, like, why was he asking that question? It was like super out of character for him. And the reason was like he actually wanted to know what was going on in Mass Effect's story and wanted to watch our friend play. So that's just kind of one thing that has really stood out to me as far as like the story of Mass Effect goes. But of course, we all know that it didn't quite live up to the hype and the expectations set by the first game, unfortunately. SNX, you feel that way for Shadowlands, the last expansion you played? You swore off of the games? Oh, in terms of like, oh yeah, where you have something that was really good up beforehand and then something else came out to just like kind of ruin it. That makes sense. Yeah, Shadowlands was the straw that broke a lot of players' backs. Yeah. I don't want to get too far into that because a lot of people feel very different about the different WoW expansions. And a lot of people also pieced out, especially after, you know, what's essentially the conclusion of Warcraft 3 with the Lich King. Ow. So, yeah. Anyway. Hey, Forge, welcome back in. If there's one thing better than playing a game, it's saving money by watching somebody else play them. I don't know if that's better, but I mean, certainly saving money. I can't really argue too much with that. All right.
So, what's going wrong here? Why is world building for video games so uniquely difficult, and what are the games with great settings like Mass Effect, Cyberpunk, Disco Elysium, and Bioshock doing right that nobody else is? Well, I think it all comes down to the fact that both we as an audience, and game developers too, tend to prioritize all the wrong things when it comes to world building. So much of our focus seems to be on making worlds that feel larger, more detailed, and more grounded in reality than ever before, on explaining every last historical footnote with boatloads of lore, and making sure entire continents are fully explorable. And while this push for completely comprehensive world design is commendable, this obsession with lore, with all the background facts, history, and explanations of a setting, is hurting world building more than it helps. That's because any given setting is only engaging when we have a reason to care about a particular time and place, and an investment in discovering more about how this particular world works. And without that stuff, it doesn't matter how good a game's lore might be, it won't mean anything to us as an audience.
Now I'm trying to think of just how much of a hassle it is between balancing so-called world building as well as like fun mechanics in trying to craft a fictional world in such a way that it doesn't suck in one of multiple dimensions. Because I would argue the more realistic you make a game, like the greater likelihood it is to suck, because part of the reason people play games is mostly for the escapism and just being reminded of how freaking tedious it is to do something like traveling in the real world, but porting that over into a game is a quick killer of fun and even immersion for many games. So maybe Final Fantasy 15 is a good example of that. Maybe it's not. Traversal in 15 wasn't too bad, but it kind of had other issues going on with it. So we could say like they probably did an okay job as far as like traversal goes. Combat was not great. The world building was blasé. They really had a lot of potential that was kind of squandered due to a lack of direction, and that really shows from like a systemic issue with them like taking over 10 years to produce that. It's quite baffling. But anyway, Adlai, welcome back into the stream. How's it going? Getting to know the dynamics of our universe is more than reason enough to forget Steam matters. All right, so... Oh, you're
For
talking
example,
to
people
Forge,
wouldn't be,
okay.
if anything, a bit too invested in the lore of Game of Thrones if they didn't start by thinking Ned Stark was a cool hero who wasn't going to die, and wanting to learn more about his relationship with the king and Jon Snow. And without that initial emotional buy-in, or if a setting manages to lose our investment, then all the background details of a world just become informational noise that we have no reason to actually care about. Basically, world building is about more than just building a world, as weird as that sounds. It's also about getting us to care about a fictional setting and rewarding that psychological investment by giving us cool new things to find out about. And games can do this without super high fidelity graphics, pages of backstory, or even any sense of realism. The only thing that games...
Yeah, that's true. For some reason, well, I guess it's probably because Minecraft was on the screen. I was thinking about how Terraria is essentially an RNG-seeded world, but there is still kind of a weird sense of mystery and intrigue which goes along with the random couple dungeons that can be generated in a world biome. So, yeah, that game doesn't even really have a story, but it kind of does at the same time. Like, you kind of fill in the gaps with your own imagination, and that pretty much requires no like truly deliberate effort on the part of the developer other than creating the assets and the environments and whatnot.
Actually have to do to build a good world is to make us give enough of a shit about this made up nonsense that getting to see more of it becomes its own reward.
Forge, I think that's a different kind of world building with Spore. Like, literally building a world.
Needless to say, that's easier said than done. So, let's start with the basics, shall we? How can games get us interested enough in their settings in the first place for us to start caring about them, and thus about getting to explore all the cool lore they've cooked up? Well, there are a variety of ways, but in my experience, the best world-building centric games hit the player hard and fast to get them engaged right away. This is important, because any world building that floats across our screens before we care about it, at best may as well not exist, and at worst us players will find actively boring. Way too many games, in particular really long or cinematic ones, are so obsessed with front-loading their lore in order to set up their big reveals and lay future plot threads, that they kind of forget to get us to care about it first, meaning that all their effort ends up being for nothing. Final Fantasy XIV, for example, has a really interesting setting with loads of cool places to discover later in the story, and in particular the expansions, but all that cool world building and story reveals are dependent on stuff you learn in the awful main story quests from the base game. So most people...
Yeah, I have crashed on the main story quest for Final Fantasy XIV a couple of times. I've talked about this on stream. Like, the first time I played through the game, I didn't complete A Realm Reborn. I don't remember exactly how far I got, but then the second time I came back to it, I did complete A Realm Reborn, and I didn't exactly enjoy that, but at least I got that portion of the game done. But I crashed on like the post Realm Reborn content. There's like stuff like heading into Leviathan with like Sahagins and whatnot, and then I just quickly lost interest because it was so clear how inconsequential the quest was, and I thought I was kind of done with that crap having finished Realm Reborn, but that next expansion didn't do me any favors, so I stopped there. And it wasn't so much that I was like disgusted by it, I just didn't feel motivated to pick it up. I guess 14 should be an example of a game where I've had that experience that I should pull out of my pocket when I think about that. And then I did try to come back to the game like a year ago or something like that, or two at this point. It's kind of hard to tell after COVID. Time just blurs together. But I stopped probably in like the beginning / midpoint of A Realm Reborn again, doing like the stupid ass Titan quest line where they're like, oh my god, Titan's coming to flatten this city like immediately, quick, go find some literal Easter eggs, oh no, go slay some monsters, oh no, this dude's asleep in a shack, talk to him. And then I'm like, are you kidding me? I just can't stand A Realm Reborn at this point. It's so bad. And so I can't get back into 14. And part of the reason why I tried to like go from scratch again is because I didn't remember hardly anything from A Realm Reborn, and I wanted that story refresher because everyone's like, "Oh my god, 14 story is so good." Well, it's not for me at this point. Yeah.
People reach the actually interesting areas having mentally switched off 100 hours ago, and are totally unable to appreciate how cool places like Ishgard or Amurot actually are if they ever reach them at all. Conversely, Final Fantasy XVI starts you off right away with some fun characters, some intrigue, and a big fight between two cool elemental monsters to get you interested in what's going on immediately.
To be honest, I did not like the intro to 16 at all. It felt really... I don't know the right words to describe it off the top of my head, but I felt like it didn't need to start there. Oh, inconsequential might be a good way to say it. Like it had like really no bearing on the rest of the story. And the events of the intro could have just been like postponed till later, and I don't really think there would have been that big of a difference. Now, what I mean by the intro, I don't necessarily mean the parts of like going into like the main character's past and like seeing how they grew up together. I think that part is impactful enough to keep it there. But I mean, like the Titan Shiva battle was just kind of like, okay, whatever. Anyway. Forge has come to the realization, had the final boss to shadow the Earthsheep and Godwyn, people would have complained that it was too obvious and an invalidation of Marika's grief. I don't know. I mean, I do think that the rule of cool would unironically prevail. So if they made it cool enough, people wouldn't have cared. But the Radahn thing just wasn't very cool. I mean, Radahn himself is cool, but it just felt so out of left field and was so underexplained that it wouldn't surprise me if a sizable chunk of the population who played through Shadow of the Earthsheep didn't even know or even expect that Radahn would show back up. Radahn's cool. I'm not saying that Radahn isn't cool. I'm saying that even now a lot of people accept the Radahn thing because they think the fight is cool enough on its own. But I think more people would think that Godwyn could be cooler depending on the presentation. So if you fought a like super kaiju mermaid man, evil, it could be good. But there's other ways to do it. Like if you fought him as he's known as like the freaking dragon killer, essentially. I mean, he's not actually called that, but the man who could take down Grand Sax or something along those lines, like getting to kind of witness that firsthand would have been pretty damn cool. So, yeah.
Does Final Fantasy XVI have a better world than Final Fantasy XIV? No, of course it doesn't. But I wager more people were able to enjoy it because it's much more effectively introduced. I think as a rule of thumb, the most effective way to get us as players to care about world building is to use something that's easier to emotionally invest in as a sort of psychological beachhead, easing us into a setting through something that we already care about.
Alright, so just to give like an example of how badass the ending for Shadow of the Earthsheep could have been with Godwyn. Now, this is like obviously has no real basis in reality, and anybody can pretty much imagine their own headcanon. So I'm just coming up with an extreme example to highlight the point, and I don't necessarily think this would be a realistic example of something that they could have done in the game. But let's say that you do all the Michelin crap, and then when you get to the top of the Divine Gate, you see a big-ass sun behind the Skidoo tree, and then as you go and enter the arena, the sun gets covered by an eclipse. And then from that eclipse, you see a merman like corpse of Godwyn, but like even bigger than normal, just like kind of wake up and start moving again. And then you see like Mikola appear out of his back. And then from that eclipse, all of a sudden you get a bunch of snow coming in from behind your back. Then you have Ronnie's hand grab your shoulder, and then she's on your back. You both become huge kaiju monsters and fight or whatnot. That would have been like beyond epic, and nobody would have cared if it was Godwyn being too obvious or not, just because it would have been so damn cool, I think. I mean, of course, somebody would care somewhere, but just trying to make my point. It would have been cool if Mesmer had more presence in like the final battle. Yeah, even stuff like that could have a lot of impact on player mindset for stuff like that.
For example, strong character writing, which is much easier to create a bond to, can immediately get us invested in a setting because it affects the little pretend digital people that we already like. Look at BioWare's cast of characters, for example. The games almost always use your party members to introduce you to key world building points that the writers want you to A, know about, and B, care about. In Mass Effect, each party member doesn't just fill you in on their species, but a world-building idea that's relevant to their own personal narrative. Tali is all about the Geth-Quarian War, Garrus hates the Council's bureaucracy, Mordian made the genophage, Kaidan's all about biotics, Ashley is all about humans being racist space rednecks, etc. By explaining their world-building, particularly the basics through characters, games can be much more confident that we'll actually remember it, and we'll be able to reach that all-important tipping point where we become knowledgeable and invested enough in the world itself that it can start to stand on its own.
And yeah, like one of the things that I do like about Mass Effect are like, I don't remember what these creatures are called because I didn't play it, my friend did. Like these guys are notoriously slow and deliberate, and the actual universal lore behind that would be because they live on a planet that has like 3 times the gravitational forces of Earth or whatnot, and thus things like falls are like they're more prone to be damaged from things like falls, so they have to be more deliberate even in their movements, which kind of plays back into their mindset as well. So just kind of as a race, they are slower and deliberate as a byproduct of their environment, which I think is really cool world building right there. Oh, those are the wrong guys, but there is a species that has that lore? Damn it. Maybe because it's like covered in shadows. I thought they kind of looked like rhino people like these dudes. Am I wrong about that? Because I thought they were big to kind of compensate for the 3G training as far as like Goku style physics is concerned.
Point where we become knowledgeable and invested enough in the world itself that it can start to stand on its own. Similarly, a nice compelling mystery.
Oh, the quadrupeds? Okay, that makes sense to me because as I was saying that, I was like, wait, these guys seem like they could probably fall over easy because they have arms. So they're quadrupeds. Okay, thank you for that, Elcor. All right, hey Jay Dixon, thanks, and welcome back to the stream. So I'm gonna back it up slightly.
Enough in the world itself that it can start to stand on its own. Similarly, a nice compelling mystery can get the player immediately invested in the kind of questions that draw them deeper into a world. In Pentiment, which takes place in what should be the unbelievably dry setting of a small rural village in Renaissance-era Germany, the game instantly gets you to care by having you try to solve a murder, something that, coincidentally, requires getting to know the town and its history. And in Baldur's Gate 3, you wake up with a worm in your face and have no idea what it does, why you have psychic powers now, or how to get rid of it, which instantly sets the adventure off on a great pace and gives you a reason to care about all the information you learn. Sometimes, however, games don't need to be quite so sophisticated with their writing, and can just get players into a world with a nice, big, blunt emotional appeal. Warhammer is the undisputed king here. You don't need to know any other lore to find the idea of space skeletons, or alien football hooligans, or this guy on his big gold toilet cool. And this simple fascination can propel you way over the hump of needing to understand boring faux Latin and imperial politics, neither of which are particularly interesting to start off with. But even in games that don't have decades of tabletop backstory to support them, novelty goes a long way towards getting us to care about the world. The games of the Fallen London universe, which take place in a subterranean, deathless version of Victorian London, are incredibly compelling right out of the gate in spite of their pretty slow gameplay, because the setting is so unique that you instantly want to find out more about it. Ditto goes for Horizon's wacky world of robot dinosaurs, where you end up stumbling into some actually pretty good backstory in your childish quest to learn more about the big cool monsters. It's not just outright coolness that can get people into a game setting though. Any emotional appeal can work. I certainly wouldn't care anywhere near as much about researching the fictional setting of Suzerain, a political RPG, if it didn't saddle you with a ruined economy, imminent war, and an assassination attempt to deal with right at the start, pushing you to really dig into the setting in order to find a solution. Equally, despite some pretty minimalistic writing, Frostpunk has this amazingly compelling world because it so cleverly gets you into the desperate shoes of your citizens. Discovering the ruins of Tesla City and Winterhome hits so hard because that grisly fate is on the horizon for you too, and the crazy things your society does to adapt to the cold have real grounding in your own stressed out decision making.
No Hokai, Bonjourno yourself. How's it going? Welcome back in. Oh, so Jay Sawyer was the director for New Vegas, and he's the one who did Pentiment? Okay, cool. I could see why it would be a mentally compelling game then.
If caring about something is the key to the success of world building, regardless of whether we're fascinated, soothed by, or driven to madness by a setting, it's when we feel nothing for a world that things start to go wrong. And unfortunately for games, nothing shatters our faith in a setting faster than the impression that our interest in it isn't worthwhile. When we have questions about a world that don't get answered, or when we start to see the cracks in the fictional facade that remind us that this is all just a bunch of polygons, it becomes way harder to emotionally invest in a setting because it doesn't feel substantive enough to be worth our time.
I was going to say, is this the Stanley Parable? Because this feels like some Willy Wonka type stuff right here.
Therefore, it's critically important for games to not just get us interested, but protect our investment in a world. And this means always having a response to any sort of question we might have about a fictional setting. This is why many of gaming's best built worlds are dense rather than broad. It's much easier to design a seamless world when it's contained within a small area. Look at Prey's Talos 1 Space Station or Bioshock's Rapture. These worlds feel so alive and so plausible, not because they are in any way realistic, but because they're so crammed full of authentic feeling details that each one can support the others, and maintain the illusion of a coherent world much more effectively. Prey's detailed crew manifest, and its little environmental stories lit all over the place, such as these people who were in a D&D game when disaster struck, give the impression that this setting was lived in long before you got there. And
those kind of attention to details are really neat. So Without Horns was saying that that one game that I thought looked like Stanley Parable was actually called Viewfinder. It's like what you would find if you made your own MC Escher world as a puzzle game. Okay, I don't think I've heard of it.
The fact that Bioshock's ruined buildings never feel generic and all clearly had some sort of pre-collapse purpose in Rapture means that the setting can always answer any questions that you might have that would otherwise challenge the world's integrity. How does Rapture trade with the outside world? Right here. You even go there as part of the main quest. Where does its oxygen come from? All these trees in the Arboretum. What do the citizens do for fun? For frolic. Or maybe the Andrew Ryan Museum in Bioshock 2, which is also great. Sadly, games with bigger worlds just can't afford this level of complete immersion in their design. They're just too big, and nobody's got the infinite development budget. But what they can do is make sure that we only remember the parts of the game that contribute to the impression of a cohesive, well-realised setting, even if it's actually a patchwork facade at best. To use Cyberpunk 2077 as an example, the world of Night City is riddled with elements that, to be honest, feel pretty underdeveloped or like they don't really fit with the rest of the world at all. But you never realise this because there are some brilliant highlight moments in the game that are so memorable that they make the world feel more complete than it actually is. The cops in Night City, for example, are barely a presence in the story or really in the world itself. They get less world building than some of the gangs, but you never question their lack of presence or their in-game incompetence because a few really effective cutscenes and quests that show just how scary the cops and in particular Max Tack ought to be fill in the gaps for you. Also, the incredibly well done storyline with Evelyn Parker and the dark implications of braindance technology work in the same way. It sets the tone for that side of the world so completely that you can almost ignore the fact that some of the more interesting implications of braindances go completely unexamined, and that sex is, paradoxically, played for laughs constantly in the game. And Cyberpunk's not the only open world that does this stuff well, but
so I've heard that they finally fixed Cyberpunk essentially, and it's actually pretty good now. I was kind of always pretty against Cyberpunk just because all of the footage that I saw for it before it came out just kind of, I don't know, sent up smoke signals where it seemed like things weren't quite what the devs were saying. There seemed to be a mismatch or a incongruity between what the devs were saying versus what I was seeing, which just kind of always makes me suspicious about projects like that. So maybe I should look at a video of the current state of Cyberpunk or something like that and reevaluate if that would be a game that I would consider playing, because I'm not particularly interested in it, but I've heard apparently its story elements are good, and I really do like narratively driven games, but I don't know. Jay Dixon said, it's a 9 out of 10 for you. You can't recommend it enough. Not very much choice and consequence. Aw, pretty curated, but it's executed artfully. Okay. Forge said, you too would probably die in a D&D game before disaster strikes. You win a game with an EA/Ubisoft budget with a FromSoft Arcane Studio level of care and detail. Yeah. Don't we all?
Bethesda, for all their faults, are great at turning totally unrealistic settings into ones that feel very lifelike, because they're stuffed full of so many little tailor-made vignettes that they pretty much support the setting on their own. Each little encounter in an Elder Scrolls game and each dungeon in Fallout is memorable or evocative or funny enough that it takes precedence in our memory, and serves as an answer to a particular world-building question, in spite of the fact that they don't really fit together very well, and most of the stuff in between them is pretty empty or nonsensical. Like how Skyrim's much vaunted Cloud District pretty much literally doesn't exist, but this smarmy guy making fun of you about it is enough to trick you into hating him and the elitism of Skyrim's noble class instead of questioning the setting. It's when games fail to answer our questions and expose holes in their world building that everything falls apart, as it feels like we're being punished for caring about something. No matter how much lore a game may have, a world that fundamentally doesn't make sense to us, or feels like it's disrespecting our investment, will
Man, what a low blow using the jailer to justify anything about how world building can turn to crap. Man, it really does take so much wind out of the sails of the World of Warcraft story when you can just arbitrarily attribute pretty much all evil or morally gray choices to the megamind plays of the jailer. And then like the way they try to resolve that storyline where he's like worried about a bigger threat on the horizon when he like literally is the embodiment of like death beyond death. So he's like super death and he's like, oh no, there's something bigger, when like literally everybody who ever died is essentially supposed to have gone to the Shadowlands. It's like, bro, get out of here with this crap. Like, I know it's a controversial take, but I would agree with kind of Asmongold's idea that the way that they should have resolved Shadowlands' story would have been to do a dream within a dream scenario and say like, hey guys, no, N'Zoth won at the end of Battle for Azeroth. You've all been dreaming. The jailer's trying to wake you guys up and you're fighting him because you've been mind controlled by the old gods. Like, sure, it would suck, but I mean, it would be orders of magnitude better than what players actually got. So, hey, Little Church Lore, welcome on in for my soapbox rant about the crappy world building that became the World of Warcraft. Bro, how's the dog still this feisty already? All right. Ever since Legion, Blizzard stopped caring for the game. I think it extended beyond, or like before Legion. I think like the real pitfalls started around Cataclysm, but for different reasons. And yeah, this is almost like trying to determine how much sand you can take away from a pile before it's no longer a pile. And then Joji Poji, welcome back to the stream. It's been a minute. How you doing? You're flexing, so I'm assuming you're doing pretty well.
Never be able to win us over. Metaphor ReFantazio has a bunch of genuinely cool worldbuilding that's explored as part of the main quest. Don't worry, I won't spoil it. But the side stories are much less well constructed. The primary motivation for your first party member, Stroll, is that his hometown and his aristocratic family were totally wiped out by monsters summoned by this sexy so-and-so. But at no point does anyone besides Stroll remark on the consequences of a regional power being wiped off the map, nor does anyone talk about what Stroll's hometown did, or literally anything else of note, giving the impression that it sort of only existed to be destroyed and wasn't really part of the larger setting, making the whole package feel frustratingly less cohesive.
Yeah, that kind of thing can be quite annoying, and that's one of the things that bothered me the most about Final Fantasy XVI. It felt like the mother crystals were there to be blown up, essentially, and nobody really gave a crap about pretty much anything the party did ever. And I talk about it in my review that it feels so arbitrary that like, oh no, you're a bearer, you can use magic. We all hate bearers, grr. And then you finish their dialogue and then have to fight an enemy 15 feet away from them, and you use obscene amounts of magic to do it, and nobody seems to care. So anyway.
Equally, Starfield. Oh, you thought I was going to let Bethesda off the hook, didn't you? For all of its pretenses of realism and its boatloads of lore, there is so much about it that...
Oh yeah, speaking of those games that were sending up smoke signals, Bethesda's Starfield was another one of those to me that like was sending up those red flags like Cyberpunk was, but this one even more so.
simply goes unexplained. Why are these colonists just standing around on an uninhabited space rock? How does Neon as a society, which is essentially a drug cartel, function as an interstellar political entity? What do the various groups think about the fact that there is an ancient precursor race handing out magic powers? We never find out, and so it makes the setting feel so hollow that all the lore the game throws at you is basically pointless, regardless of how good it may or may not be. And this brings me back to that central idea of lore not
I was gonna say, man, that has to really suck to have like these really cool ideas and want them to get implemented into the game, but then the game to just fail in so many other regards that what you have, which could be objectively cool, just kind of gets hamstrung by all the other failures along the way. Could have just stopped at Bethesda and you'd understand what you mean. I don't know, man. They did make Morrowind and Oblivion, even though I know like Oblivion isn't quite as universally beloved as Morrowind, and of course, New Vegas.
Not as the be-all and end-all of worldbuilding, but as a reward for caring about and immersing yourself in a setting. If we don't make a setting worth filling with all those delicious nuggets of backstory, then creating them in the first place is pointless. And even then, there are far more ways to articulate lore-adjacent information than dry, factual Wikipedia articles and exposition dumps. By over-explaining the tiny
Obsidian made New Vegas, damn it. I don't know the Bethesda Obsidian lore well enough, apparently.
Details and avoiding nuance, even games that do everything else right can end up building worlds that feel stiff and lifeless no matter how much context we pump into them. Look at the difference between Alpha Centauri and its spiritual successor Civ Beyond Earth. The latter has way more comprehensive backstory to its setting and loads more stuff on each faction and each leader than the game that inspired it. And yet, Alpha Centauri is completely unmatched when it comes to creating a world that feels rich and textured because it uses its very limited world count to give each character and each society a coherent worldview, one that tells us far more than objective, dispassionate information ever could. The reveals that totalitarian nihilist Yang dumps corpses back into the food supply, or that technocrat Morgan actually thinks the unsustainable practices that ruined Earth were pretty much fine, paints a far more vivid picture than paragraphs and paragraphs of backstory on how Suzanne Fielding had two sisters and used to be an accountant, which doesn't exactly stir the imagination, does it? In fact, many games that manage to create what feels
Yeah, if anything, I would almost make the argument that that kind of falls under Chekhov's gun, where if you do have something that's intrinsic to a world, it needs to serve a purpose. Now, knowing whether or not a character has siblings can be useful if you're like, oh, that dude's definitely a middle child, I guess. But I mean, it's just kind of fluff if it's there for the sake of being there, which is kind of hard to quantify because quite often, as Adam was pointing out earlier in the video, and even I was agreeing with him, that some of these kind of minor details can push what would be considered a good game into like a great territory for me. So, I guess to me the difference is like learning little factoids doesn't necessarily go into world building as much as characterization does. So the little sibling factoid doesn't help characterize a person or their people, and so therefore is kind of inconsequential. And if you're trying to keep somebody's attention, you probably want to reduce as many inconsequential elements as possible, which is a lot easier to say than it is to do. They had to do it under Bethesda, but it had a bunch of Black Isle Studios guys. Okay. I'll probably need to play New Vegas sometime. It's like been steadily creeping up my priority list of things to get to, especially with the launch of the damn Fallout television series, which isn't to say like, oh, I need to play this game to understand the TV show, but it's more like, oh yeah, the world of Fallout can be really freaking cool at times. So I should, indulge myself and play the one that's widely regarded as the best in that category.
Feel like very rich settings actually go out of their way not to explain themselves in depth. Part of the genius of why Disco Elysium's world feels so alive even though we only get to see a tiny part of it is because the game avoids communicating an objective fact.
Play it on stream, bro. The way that I play a Fallout game is degenerate. It would probably not be a good playthrough. Although, I mean, who the hell am I to say like what the audience enjoys, I guess. Hey, Hulko, how's it going? I'm probably going to do that mod setup that fixes a lot of the bugs. That's the other thing, which is kind of a bummer, but that's not the word. I'm trying to think of like, oh, that would like disincentivize me, dissuade me from wanting to play a game like Fallout or anything like that. Generally speaking, I'm pretty against having to mod games other than bug fixes. And for the Bethesda games in particular, or, you know, Obsidian, you got me, there's that whole element of you don't know what you don't know, and like there's so many crazy overboard mod packs out there that you kind of need to do a decent amount of research to even start playing the game if you want to have like a streamlined experience, and that's kind of a turn off for me. Yeah.
Character, including the player themselves, has their own take on the revolution, the monarchy, capitalism, the police, and the impending destruction of reality. So when a character like Joyce gives you the rundown on world history, you're not just being read to from a document, you're also having to decode her own biases and the things she leaves out, which gives you a much more intimate connection to Revachol and a much greater incentive to come to your own conclusion about the stuff that the game only ever implies, like whether Dolores Day was actually a spooky alien. No, I'm not kidding. This same dynamic is true for a lot of other games with really compelling settings. Rather than presenting the player with a dry, objective account, they convey a much more layered setting in a more efficient way by letting the player get their hands dirty and figure out the lore themselves. In Dishonored, for example, the plague isn't just a background lore detail, it ebbs and flows with your actions, visibly affecting the world. All the consumables aren't just generic items, but reference in-universe people and places that you can spot elsewhere, and basically all the targets and location get name-dropped constantly, both before and after you actually visit them, all serving to give the world a sense of being interconnected and alive, flowing through and around your perspective and actions. There is very little that's more boring than when a game presents you with a big, weighty digital tome and tells you to do some homework in order to understand what's going on, and all too many titles take this easy way out and don't work their lore into the setting in a naturalistic way. Ultimately, this means that most people, at best, trudge through all the boring backstory out of obligation, or at worst, won't bother finding it at all. Instead, by giving players the chance to discover lore and background details organically, games can make it a much more effective reward mechanism, rather than turning what should be a treat into a chore.
And now that I think about it, FromSoft might do something intrinsically right with the way that they've integrated lore into the game, along with having the item functions written into the text. Although, to be fair, I've definitely heard of people like Moxie Watts, not to name anybody, who may or may not have continued to press the square button to get to that second item tab for lore information, and may or may not have only been reading the quick description for things. So anyway, Matt B, welcome into the stream. How you doing, my man? You're an extreme hater and think New Vegas and Fallout 2 are the only good Fallout games? That's kind of funny because never mind. Yeah, I do need to play New Vegas. My issue with never having gotten into it before, and I've said this quite a few times, is that I always wanted to go through Fallout 3 first and then beat that because that's the one I started out with. And then it was one of those games where it's just kind of too big and it's pretty easy to get burned out before you complete it when you have a brain like mine, which wants to see absolutely everything before you even like touch the main quest. And so I played through Fallout 3 twice. The first time I saw like the entire southern and western half of the map essentially, and so the second time I went through, I did like the north and northeast side of the map, and then I did the main story, and then that was all to like prep for Fallout 4's release. And then when I started to play Fallout 4 after having like played extensively through 3 again, I had kind of realized that 4 was a lot more similar to 3 than I would have preferred, and I was just a little bit too burned out to continue that game, and I was certainly not in the mood to go through New Vegas after that point. But it's been so long now that I'd probably be fine going back through New Vegas. So we'll see. All right, let's go back in.
Audio logs and such have become a widespread staple because they ground world building in a time and a place that the player can immediately appreciate, and give all important texture by conveying this information through the perspective of a character in the world rather than an omniscient codex writer, which is much more interesting. This player-centric approach to world building is also why I love anything with a scanner or a bestiary that you can poke around the world with, because it makes you feel like you're actually doing proper research on a setting rather than just being told about it. Examining creatures in their natural habitat, or piecing together the progress of the Metroid breeding project in Metroid Prime feels great because it's like you're doing actual detective work into the world, uncovering more new mysteries the more effort you put in, and the same is true for many other games with the same sorts of mechanics. In fact, now that I mention it, this is arguably part of the core appeal of Pokemon as well, and it's why its setting is so evocative in spite of the fact that it is plainly nonsense. You get to take an active role in mapping out the Pokemon's habitats, seeing how they fit into their environment, and when you catch one, you even get a cool fact about them. If that's not using lore as a reward, then I don't know what is. Additionally, games can even world build.
Damn it. I guess I never thought of how similar Pokemon truly was to Dark Souls at that point, but to build off of Hilko's point with the Metroid Prime scanner, yeah, I've been a long time proponent of saying that Metroid Prime is a lot more similar to Dark Souls than people tend to give it credit for, if for no other reason than the scanner. I really fell in love with Metroid Prime primarily because of the scanner, I think, which just helped flesh out that world so much more than the previous games like Super Metroid for me.
Through the mechanics, something that irritatingly few games really take advantage of. By physically connecting us to their fictional worlds via their mechanics, games have a great opportunity to use mechanical friction as a vector for world building that no other medium has access to. A personal favourite example is in Persona 5. No other game has managed to get me to build up quite as intimate a relationship with the city environment, because unlike everything else, Persona 5 forces you to actually run around and visit each individual shop yourself, catch and pay for public transport, shove through crowds, and manage your schedule around what places are open. It's so much less convenient than if all of Tokyo was just one big menu, but through the friction imposed by the setting, you get a much more intimate feel of just how big and overwhelming the place really is. Equally, in the criminally unknown rogue.
I think it also helps that Persona 5 feels really intimate and cozy in a way because of how the city is kind of sculpted to be smaller than like Americans are typically used to, in terms of like having the space of like Western infrastructure versus maybe I shouldn't say Western infrastructure. This is kind of more of an American and like North American thing, just because we have such an overabundance of space. We try to fill it up as much as possible compared to like older style cities like those found in Europe and whatnot. And so that's probably a bit of a paradigm shift that works on a subliminal level that people might not even be too aware of. Hopefully that made sense. Caves of Cud.
Like Caves of Cud, the desert setting of the game is heavily based around water as a currency, and rather than just making it an analogue for gold pieces, Cud forces you to carry it around in flasks, drink it while you adventure, and even use it as part of a greeting ritual with people you meet, cementing its importance both in lore and in game at the same time. And one tiny example that I will always call back to is the bit at the start of Half-Life 2 where the cop makes you pick up a can for no reason and beats you if you don't. It's more effective world building than an entire book of backstory on the Combine, and I love it. Really, regardless of what kind of setting is being built, the thing that makes a lore interesting is a feeling of active involvement, where the world is communicated not just through opening monologues and lore books, but through every facet of the game. Because only then can we feel like it's our interest and our relationship with the world that matters, rather than, our attendance. All of this is to say that I think our view on world building as a topic at large is needlessly simplistic. Throughout all of gaming's history, we've been running to catch up with the stories that inspired us, creating and asking for ever bigger, higher fidelity worlds that cost more money to make and have more and more stuff in them. And while this strategy was certainly effective during the medium's earliest years, it was also only ever going to get us so far. Now that technology and budgets are no longer holding us back, video games as an art form have raced so far ahead that I think they've missed out on some foundational lessons along the way. And as a result, a lot of gaming's big, ambitious, complicated worlds end up collapsing under their own weight, and we as an audience simply aren't experienced enough to explain why that happened and why games with good world building function as well as they do. Video games as a medium for world building.
So, do we have any people in chat who had ever played or even partially watched the anime for Dot Hack? Because to me, that was kind of a really interesting case in world building that just kind of like didn't go anywhere, partially because the story that they were trying to tell at the time seemed too big, and maybe it eventually worked out well on the Japanese side of things. I kind of like fell off the dot hack train after the very first game came out, because it just didn't live up to the potential, mostly because of like technical limitations, I think. But anyway, there was a lot of really good stuff going for dot hack. It was essentially like the proto Sword Art Online, if you guys are familiar with that as well, but just didn't quite make it that far in my mind, although I don't know what they really did after the first game. So anyway, they like tried to marry like reality with a fake MMO type thing, and they had like a tie-in anime, and it was really cool. But man, now I kind of want to fall down that rabbit hole again just to see like what the hell happened with it. Oh damn, they actually released all 4? It got better toward the end. You were annoyed Fragment died in Japan. Okay. I don't know what that means. Okay, so let's go back to the video.
Building have so much potential. All we have to do is realize that more lore is no substitute for a setting that people feel invested in and want to find out more about on their own. Look at anything FromSoft has made. Those games have an active contempt for the idea of lore as comprehensive, direct explanation. They give you little snippets and clues, often hidden away or wrapped in symbolism, and even once you can put it all together, it's often only enough to understand like a third of what's going on. Who the hell are these guys? No idea. Who are the Outer Gods? Who turned my boy Bok into a bush? We still don't know, and it's pissing me off. And yet, in spite of the fact that these settings provide no concrete answers, we, myself included, will still dedicate hours to concocting ridiculous theories to explain these worlds and have a great time doing it. Not because of some grand lore document, but because we care about the setting, and because there's just enough connecting threads between the vague nonsense to make it all feel worthwhile. And none of that would be possible if Miyazaki had simply appeared and said that it was all the doing of the great mysterious Lord of Poison Swamps the whole time. Basically, no amount of 8K textures, all-star voiced actors, and infinitely AI-generated lore are going to compensate for not understanding the fundamentals of narrative technique. Show don't tell might be the cliché writing advice that everyone gives, but when it comes to world building, games have no choice but to tell, and what that means is that they have to come up with interesting ways of conveying and getting us to care about their lore, or they risk losing our interest forever. The upside is that simply by leveraging the unique, non-linear, interactive nature of games to their advantage, developers can make worlds so rich, so unique, and so deep that J.R.R. Tolkien will posthumously throw up out of jealousy. All it requires is thinking a little bit outside the box, learning from the techniques of successful world building rather than their surface level aesthetics, and realizing that getting people to care is much more important than giving them all the answers. World building is one of fiction's nerdiest subject areas, and its reputation is well deserved. But in spite of it being associated with punishingly intricate cross-sections of spaceships and retellings of the War of the Roses with all the names changed, it also serves as the backbone of some of gaming's best experiences, because it provides us all, from lore experts to world-building tourists, with the fundamentally human joy of seeing how things fit together in ever more complex ways. The very same joy that informs learning about history, science, or culture in the real world, or, as another way of putting it, the world-building of our own reality. Really, from that perspective, all that's required to enjoy worldbuilding in video games is an open enough mind to appreciate it on levels beyond the surface, and the humility to admit that not being able to know everything is sometimes what makes it fun. As for enjoying the world building of planet Earth, well, let's just say that all you really need to know is that it all began in the 13th Age of Chaos, where Lord High Exarch Thalamidius the Shadow's Bane began his greatest crusade against the Riverlands. Hello, and welcome to this, the After the Video segment. What is that? Well, it's the part of every video where I reward you for making it all the way to the end, and /or for leaving the video playing in the background, by telling you all about the secret post-game content, which is to say, some cool...
I have no idea what this game is. So yeah, speaking of no idea of knowing what a game is, Hilko was saying that they really wanted to try Pentiment. Yeah, I've never heard of it before, and it looked kind of interesting. I mean, I would want to know more about it before I would embark on that. But that is kind of one of the fun things of like going down these different types of rabbit holes, because it just kind of exposes you to new things which can, you know, broaden the horizons and whatnot. Obsidian's kind of pet project, if you remember correctly. Yeah, so just maybe another one of those things that I need to add to the list of things to check out eventually.
internet things that you should be taking a look at. First up is a website and team of writers by the name of Aftermath. It should be no surprise to anyone that's been paying attention to the news that over the past few years, games journalism has been absolutely gutted by the greedy venture capitalists that control the world, and as a result, the industry has become a shadow of its former self, and nowadays it's basically just a clickbait farm. However, that's not stopped a couple of scrappy, independent teams who care about things like journalistic integrity and paying people properly from trying to rebuild things from the ground up, and Aftermath are some of the best in the biz. A lot of the core team have worked on some of the biggest gaming sites on the internet, and they've carried that expertise into some great writing that's finally free from the shackles of
Damn, I was muted. I was saying, is Riley a picture of the red shirt guy from the World of Warcraft conference? Is this an out of season April Fool's joke? Because it looks like him.
chasing ad revenue and needing to cozy up to big publishers. They are great, and if you like good games writing, please check them out. And if you're looking for something else to check out, might I recommend my patrons, who you should be bowing to in the street and offering your firstborns to like the miserable curs that you are. Without my patrons, my channel and videos like this simply wouldn't exist. And so take it from me when I say that the tiniest amount of support makes all the difference. $1 from one person for 1 month is worth more money for the channel than you will ever generate from ad revenue alone, and that's not even considering all the cool bonus stuff you get, like extra game design goodness, behind the scenes content, earlier access to videos, and my eternal permission to ad block my videos. Except, maybe don't tell YouTube about that last one. Shh! Additionally, patrons also get their name in the credits, some generous people off to the side, and the most generous of all in a now weirdly iconic, big-spoken list right at the end. Who are those people? Well, they are Ali Wright, Andrew Labrano, Auna94, Bobby, Bodybuilding Baby Balbon, Brennan Spalding, Brian Natariani, Constant.
At this point, I'd be really tempted to submit my name as a tongue twister, which sounds like it would be harder to do, but there's actually a surprising amount of names which are tongue twisters. Although I guess to make a tongue twister work, you would need some form of repetition. Dang it. And I don't remember if I said it, but I saw your message earlier and I thought it, but I might not have voiced it. But anyway, welcome back to the stream, Ao. Welcome in. How's it going?
Amend, Cosmix360, Daniel Medjes, Dirk Jan Karenbeld, Dirk Karen Janbeld, Jesus Christ, thanks for making this as confusing as possible for me, whoever did that, Digleteer, Dis Ellie, Ecton, Edward Franklin Woods, Edwina the Space Bun, Eric Walston, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkull, Grandpa Mocker, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Jinkaloid, Kevin Help Us, Konolov, Kangi, Luke Kokoran, Mace254, Marika Vladalina Altair, Mark Vallant, May Contain Fox-Like Substance, Mika Oi, Mike Oxlong, Nate Graff, Oliver Marhofer. Oh, you don't say, Mao? Was that you who donated, who was the patron a couple moments ago? Patrick Romberg, Peter Tomasic, Reddidex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Silver Fulfy, Steamrollerman, Steve Riley, Tyler Duncan, Uprising, Von Boomslang, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Brandmeier, and Chow. Okay, that's it, that's all. See you around. Bye! Alright, for tongue twister, Adlai would choose Adlai Chalk Withering Lick Tackle FF. Okay, that didn't seem too bad. I don't know if I read it very fluently or not, but oh well. Alright, Mao is too broke to be that patron. Very well. That's fair. Alright. So, I don't think I liked or shared this, so let's make sure to do that. Yeah, that was a really good video by Adam, so let's go ahead and paste and share it for you guys. So, I've already been subscribed to his channel. I don't remember what else I watched, but these have, I do remember that, thinking that this is like a high quality video channel here. So, if you guys have not heard of Adam Millard before, I would definitely recommend checking out some of his other titles and whatnot. So, that was a good one. Now, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and do something a little bit out of character for the channel and actually learn a little bit more about Blasphemous lore with Smoughtown's video on the... Nope, we're not going to do the twisted one. I wanted to do the miracle first. On the miracle, and then next we'll get into the one about the twisted one with the lore hunter. So, here we go.
You almost went and bought Blasphemous the other day. If you like 2D Metroidvanias, it's definitely a good one.
Sometimes in the form of blessing and grace, sometime in the form of punishment and corruption. That divine will, equally pious and cruel, which we could not and will never be able to unravel, was called the miracle.
As Dio Gratius narrates, the miracle is a powerful force that punishes and uplifts at will, and manifests itself in different ways. The pile of ash, the golden visages, and the last son of the miracle are all works of the miracle, and part of its plan for penance. It is referred to as the...
Oh yeah, and I should remember that this game obviously, or this video did not come out before the last DLC, and with it being released 5 years ago, it probably does not have the context of the second game even, somehow. So anyway, even so, I think this could still give me, like, it might still be able to fill in some of the gaps of my understanding of the miracle and whatnot. So anyway, Robbie, nice to see you again. No, you don't have to apologize for anything. It's totally understandable that, you know, we all have our own different lives going on. After Metroid Prime, your favorite game are 2D Souls-likes. So yeah, I would definitely recommend a game like Hollow Knight for sure, and Blasphemous 1.
The grievous miracle or the sorrowful miracle, and it is both worshipped and feared, as it punishes and blesses the people of this land. The miracle seems to have some form of will, as it is often attributed with having its own will and plan. The miracle seems to have first manifested itself in the form of the first miracle.
One devout and tormented youngster asked the high will for punishment. He placed a wooden log where he sat and prayed. He prayed hoping to be heard. He prayed for pain, so he could ease the guilt that sharply pierced his soul. Then, the miracle manifested itself. It made roots grow and twist over his arms and legs.
Dio Gratius describes how...
So, Smo might be right here about the alleged manifestation of the miracle, but I think there can be room for argument depending on the interpretation of what people think when they hear the word manifested. So I don't think it would be wrong to say that the miracle manifested itself as the first miracle in like the Twisted one, but I don't necessarily know if that means that's the exact moment the miracle itself like first came into existence. And I think the miracle may have existed in the dream place even before that, but may have just been kind of different version of itself before like the arrival or the creation of the higher wills or whatever they're called. All right, Flora, you have a good night and you take care.
A young boy prayed to be punished, to feel pain, and his prayer was answered. His suffering is seen as a miracle. He prayed for pain in order to ease his sense of guilt, his inherent guilt. And this plays on the idea of original sin in Christianity, that is, that we are inherently born with sin, inherited from the actions of those that came before us. And in the dark world of Blasphemous, this means venerating the cruel punishment by the miracle as payment for these sins. The young man became the first father, the Twisted One, and he is the being that we see in the iconography, akin to Jesus upon the cross, a man contorted around wood. We can see this imagery in the menu, the hilt of our sword, and the large statue in the Silent Brotherhood's church. And we see it in the form of punishment that we see throughout the land, where people are crucified.
Man, I really wish I had a text dump for this game. So Mao was saying the high wills created the miracle, at least that's all the lore points to, more than the other way around. I am really reluctant to accept anything that is more or less sourced from the higher wills as being definitive about the nature of the higher wills and the miracle, because like I've often compared, maybe often is a strong word, as I've compared the nature of the dream in Blasphemous to the nature of the Nightmare of Mensis in Bloodborne, I think it's just as plausible that we could have had some dream interlopers go in and inadvertently discover the miracle, and they twisted its powers toward their own end, and they tried to instill themselves as the gods / divine rulers of Custodia and whatnot. And sorry, the dog is distracting me now. Yeah, they could have instilled themselves as the rulers of Custodia, but with those scant descriptions which mention like the eternal procession and other things predating the higher will, that makes me doubtful as to whether or not they created the miracle, or whether or not the miracle was just kind of a latent, dormant power within the dream that whatever went on to become the higher wills would come to create. Because I don't know how fair of a comparison this is. We still do have that kind of Aquinas argument. I guess you could attribute it to Aristotle, of like the first unmoved mover, except Blasphemous version, where if the higher wills are the ones who are like moving the universe, relatively speaking, then what moved the higher wills to be like the first event in this canon timeline? That would be one thing, but since we're told that there's something which predates the higher wills, it makes me a lot more skeptical about all of these claims. All right, let's go back in.
Crucified in the same position he was, and in fact it seems to make up the religious symbol that looks like a figure of 8. The current age of suffering, known as the Age of the Turned Throne, started with a new manifestation of the sorrowful miracle, which resulted in the creation of the Pile of Ash. The Kickstarter campaign for the game gives us some good oversight of this miracle and the events leading up to the game. The High Pontiff, leader of the religion of this world, was sick of a world full of sin and lack of penance, and so he turned his throne and his back on the people. Following this symbolic gesture, the miracle transformed him into a giant tree. This tree then burned for 90 days and 90 nights and left a giant pile of ash in its wake. It's possible that the lack of devotion and the sin that's been described in the Kickstarter campaign is the reason for the punishment that would follow. But more importantly from this passage, it's important to note that the pontiff turned his throne and his back on the people. This is a symbolic gesture of the divine or the high wills turning their back on the people of Custodia, and while the throne has its back turned to the people, this age of penance will continue. As with what happens to the penitent one at the bad ending of the game, people, members of the church and the congregation, try to rush up and claim the golden throne for themselves, and because of their guilty hearts they were punished by being devoured by the ash and remade as bloodthirsty beasts. These beasts then spread over the world and are the monsters that we face in game, as they are meant to spread punishment further. This idea is more clearly relayed in the in-game lore. 3 items give a retelling of this event. 1.
So I guess we could also contextualize that stuff with what we've learned more about the higher wills and whatnot in Blasphemous 2, with them being jealous. So if others are trying to gain the throne, that could essentially usurp power, devotion, adoration, however you want to slice it, from the greater wills into like a more personal end. So it makes sense that they would kind of strike down those who would try to ascend that throne, I suppose.
The smoking heart of incense. 2. The heart of virtuous pain. And 3. The heart of Carillion incense. Each item has a verse from the works known as the Works and Graces of the Sorrowful Miracle, presumably a religious text from this period, and I will now read verse 2 and 3 together as one. The wind blew strongly through the fractures of the cathedral that the one tree had originated, lifting the ash, creating dense grey clouds, hiding the whole mother church and drowning her in a deep darkness of lead. The ground began to tremble, then a terrible cry was heard from the depths of the mountain of ash, and that cry was joined by more and more, guttural screams, animal roars, monsters, and one which was heard above all, the scream of an old man, which resounded gravely as out the throat of a giant.
All right, so to address Mao's point here, part of the reason why I am very skeptical of any claim of the higher wills creating the miracle would be that even after we kill the higher wills, the miracle itself seems to persist. It seems to exist in a capacity that is somewhat independent of the higher will, which isn't that big of a deal because, I mean, if we compare some corollary examples to real life, it's not as though if you kill a parent that their child will die, unless they're Ariana. Actually, it's the other way around with Ariana. But there seems to be the fact that the higher wills itself gains its power from the miracle that implies to me that the miracle is the superior of the two in that relationship. I would disagree that it's the miracle itself which is orphaned, but that plays a lot into interpretation. I understand what you're saying, but I think it needs to be contextualized within the context of Blasphemous 2 and the wake of what the higher will did. And so I would classify how the miracle exists in a game like Blasphemous 2 and even Blasphemous 1 as being different than how it may have existed before the events of those games.
All those who once were swallowed by the ashes emerged from it in great hordes, the hordes of the miracle, the punishment, with only faith in their minds and rage in their guts, willing to punish all those who had escaped from such a holy fate, from the will of the miracle itself. The chain of events speak for themselves, and I won't repeat myself spelling out what this actually all means. However, it is worth examining the morals and ideas presented by these texts. From verse 3 it says, willing to punish all those who had escaped from such a holy fate, from the will of the miracle itself. These monsters that come from the ash are a holy extension of the miracle. Chrysanta tells us that by killing monsters on our journey, we have committed crimes against the miracle and its outbreaks, these outbreaks being the monster and part of the miracle's will. One of those born from the miracle as a monster is the Ten Piedad, which is one of the first monsters we must beat on our path to penance. It looks like a stag made out of wood, again sealing the link between the miracle and trees and wood. There's also a bit of lore from the thorned symbol item that gives us a perspective from the person who used to be this monster before it was transformed. The lore reads, I'm still inside the creature. I can hear its roar outside. I can hear the thunderous beating of its heart. I just wanted to sleep, but I saw the miracle in my dreams. It spoke to me. That is why I lied down in the lady's open arms. But the miracle appeared to me again. It was more and more tangible. Then I woke up, but I was no longer myself. I was a prisoner trapped inside a rooted body. A body immersed in constant anger, in constant pain. I am awake in a sleeping body. So this is the Ten Piedad. It refers to lying in my lady's arms, i.e. the statue we find him in, and that he lay down there as a human and woke up as a monster. But more importantly, this piece of lore shows us that inside the monster there is still a remnant of the person who existed before the miracle transformed them. His penance is to suffer inside a body, feel its anger, and no longer control his own body. Our penance is to be torn apart by this monster, limb from limb. I'm once again going to refer to a passage from the Works and Graces of the Sorrowful Miracle, which says, Then a terrible cry was heard from the depths of the mountain of ash. And one was heard above all, the scream of an old man, which resounded gravely, as out the throat of a giant. This passage obviously refers to Escribar, a member of the church leadership that was, according to Deogratius, was kissed by the grievous miracle.
I want to double check that description.
This passage, which resounded gravely.
Oh, okay. From the depths of the mountain of ash. Okay, I'm following now. Okay.
Gravely, as out the throat of a giant. This passage obviously refers to Escribar, a member of the church leadership that was, according to Deogratius, was kissed by the grievous miracle, and transformed into a new twisted being, which is the giant form we face in the second part of his fight, and is named the last son of the miracle. He is a perfect example of how the miracle transforms people, and thanks to Escribar's dialogues, when he speaks to us through his dreams, we can get an understanding of how he transforms, and how terrible it must be.
I feel my blood turning into black sap, and my aged skin into reddish bark.
Escribar is one of those who's suffering the most harsh penance, and we get this from the lore of the Holy Wound of Attrition, which reads as follows. His holiness, because of his high penance, must endure suffering in his soul in 3 ways. Each way is a motive, and each motive is a sore. He bears a great burden, his great humiliation and penance, and he bears the burden of the Father. His suffering is what makes him so holy, because it is so intense. Yet it is the miracle who controls him.
The funny thing to me is I'm like, oh, so that's how you're supposed to do the fight. Because I kind of cheesed it with the lightning buff. So it's kind of funny seeing it done like properly melee style.
And it is the miracle who has paved the way to his defeat. We know it was the miracle who created the golden visages that we encounter, for the lore of the Wound of Contrition reads as follows. The miracle created the golden visages from the very fervour of the uncorrupted saints, to preserve them eternal in the forbidden dream. 3 identical faces covered in torrid gold are the guardians of the 3 runes in his holiness soul. Thus the miracle has created a way for the last son of the miracle to be overcome, but only for one who is truly penitent, and follows the path described by Deogratius by committing the 3 humiliations, and then humbling themselves before the 3 golden visages. This is our path of penance, following the 3 humiliations, and then overcoming the last son of the miracle, and defeating him, freeing him from his torment. This is the path we must follow, and it has been constructed by the miracle as part of its plan. The penitent one also seems to have been chosen by the miracle, and his path that we play through in the game seems to be a will of the miracle itself. The first golden visage tells us that us being there, in the dream, humbling ourselves before the golden visages, is part of the miracle's plan, that we have been chosen. The penitent one's chosen status also seems to be alluded to in the Kneeling prequel comic, where Chrysanta says that if we are...
Oh yeah, now that actually makes me wonder, do you guys know if the DLCs to Blasphemous 1 had come out before October 4th, 2019? And nobody really has to know this, but if you just happen to, that'd be cool to know, because I don't know if this was made before like Ending C was even released. No idea? Okay, no worries.
Are truly the chosen one, we will come back from the death she has just bestowed upon us. Aside from this, we also have the Blade of Guilt, which is a weapon that is the work of the miracle itself. So all these things seem to allude to the fact that he is chosen, but again I will deal with this in a separate video for the penitent one. It is just worthy of note that this is another work of the miracle.
Oh yeah, and this is part of why I also doubt the higher will being like the miracle itself, because if our character is chosen by the miracle, why does the higher wills seem to express surprise and indignation at our challenge toward them? So there does seem to be like a little bit something extra going on here in my mind. I could be wrong. I mean, I don't fully understand the lore of Blasphemous. I'm willing to admit that, but these are just kind of my grievances with the story as I understand it so far.
And it seems that our path is chosen by the miracle itself. This new world and new age of penance is overseen by the Church from the Mother of Mothers, and Escribar, His Holiness, is the new Pope-like figure. His disfigurement at the hand of the miracle is obviously seen as divine. His rule is more or less absolute as a religious authority, and we encounter a number of fanatical followers of his who believe in his divine authority.
I gotta admit, it is just so nice to be able to just chill and appreciate the actual character design if you're not the one piloting the game.
Chrysanta of the Rapt Agony appears to be a knight of Escribar. Not only does she stand between the penitent one and Escribar, but in the prequel comic, The Kneeling, She kills the Penitent One and tosses his body with those of the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow in order to stop him before he even begins his journey. But why was the Brotherhood and the Penitent One killed at this point? Well, I would like to do a full video on the Penitent One and the Silent Brotherhood, but I will have a stab for now. Escribar says he has dreamed of the Penitent One and his arrival, but knows nothing of him, who he is, apart from his cold visage, which is indistinguishable from that of the Silent Brotherhood. Therefore, it's plausible to me that Escribar could have taken steps to prevent the Penitent One from killing him, and knowing him only by his mask, the mask of the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow, and therefore it's not hard to imagine that he would have all of them killed in order to kill the one that was meant to stop him. Of course, this is just my theory at this point, and I will look into it more in the future.
I kind of like that theory. It makes a lot of sense as far as like being one of those archetypal biblical stories there, like with the birth of Jesus and trying to kill all the children in the area to subvert that prophecy that was given along with Jesus's birth, if I'm remembering the story correctly, which I'm probably not. At least not fully, because I can't... It was Nebuchadnezzar, wasn't it? Yeah. But anyway, like there's like a bunch of stories like that, not just in the Bible, but just in general. So if I remember correctly, I might have phrased it poorly, but there's the king Nebuchadnezzar who was told a prophecy that his reign would come to an end by the birth of Jesus. Or maybe this is like the Torah, maybe it's a different baby. And so he tried to kill all the baby boys that were being born in his land, and that just didn't happen because, you know, we got Jesus. I don't think that's right. I think I might be mixing a few things. Whoopsies.
Returning to the servants of Escribar, we also have the Anointed Legion, which seems to be a division of holy warriors that was created by Escribar.
Or anyway, let's just use a Greek example. So Oedipus is one of those things where Oedipus's father was told that he's going to be killed by his son, so he told his manservant to go out and kill his infant baby boy, so that way he couldn't be killed by his son. But then, of course, you know, fate happens. His manservant feels bad for the baby boy, sets it adrift. Oedipus grows up in another land, and then he comes back to his homeland, essentially, kills his father, ends up marrying his mother, and so he's just kind of like this tragic, twisted figure as a result of his father trying to forestall fate.
And serve him. The Yova of Proclamation reads as follows: "It shall be called the Anointed Legion, said His Holiness. Under the armour, their bodies shall be covered with bandages, anointed with oils that I myself will bless. They will protect the mothers of mothers, as I will protect them. These blessed warriors help keep Escribar's rule, and protect the Mother of Mothers Church, which is why Esdras tries to stop us at the entrance to the Mother of Mothers to protect the Church and His Holiness." Other events have been attributed to the miracle. Firstly, we can see the miracle created the 3 golden visages as a way for the true penitent to defeat the last son of the miracle. We also meet the being known as Altas Gracias. This pitiful being was once 3 sisters, and these 3 sisters wanted to avoid the unavoidable fate of being married off. This story is told through the lore found in 4 items, and I will read the first 3 parts from it, and these come from the items Torn Bridal Ribbon, Black Grieving Veil, and Melted Golden Coins. Together it reads, "Yes, brother, it has been a long time since I stopped officiating nuptials, since the day those 3 sisters embraced each other, praying since the day they asked the miracle itself to help them avoid such a holy bond. No one knows what they asked for in that prayer, nor why they didn't want to be wedded. The miracle, with its grievous plans, went to the aid of the sisters, if you can call that aid. I was there, I bore witness to that creation. The hairs of the sisters grew and braided, wrapping around them, making a terrifying crunching noise until it covered them completely, shaping itself as an egg made out of rough, knotty hair. So it would appear that the miracle is attributed with changing things. We can see in this answering of a prayer its duality, both cruel and blessing. It blesses them by answering their prayer, but not quite in the way they expect, and their fate is very cruel indeed, as we can see in the game. We can see the power of the miracle throughout the world, and through the monsters it has created through the pile of ash. But this is all well and good, but what does the miracle want? What is the aim? And what was the purpose of the pile of ash and the age of penance that followed? It seems to be the will of the miracle to make everyone suffer for their sins, but where does it end? Let us consider endings A and B to try and understand what the point of this age of penance is, and the point of the ash. I interpret B as follows.
Now I am wondering if this video did come out after ending C was announced, because A and B kind of implies that there could be a C, but it could still just be A and B for all I know.
You don't question your pilgrimage or go deeper or answer the question that Deogracius sets for you at the beginning of the game when he hands you the thorn. You just complete your pilgrimage the most basic way without looking deeper into your guilt, and kill the last son of the miracle. Then, when you try to climb the pile of ash, like those before you, you are weighed down by your guilt, as you have not looked deeper and you have not expelled the guilt from your body by undertaking true penance, which Deogracius tried to tell you about at the beginning of the game. Ending A shows us the true path to penance, and the true point the miracle is trying to make with the pile of ash. Deogracius gives us the answer right at the beginning by handing us the item Thorn. The item description reads as follows. A small gift from Deogracius, nailed into the effigy of the twisted under the guard of your sword. The thorns arouse from the miracle, feed on sin and guilt, growing with the burden that its bearer carries. He also gives us a big hint when he hands us this, because he says,
Take this thorn and place it on the handle of your sword. If, when the time comes, as you grip your weapon firmly, you notice that it wounds you and makes you bleed, having grown, with more thorns sprouting from it, writhing over the figure of the Father carved into the knob, that will mean that you are at the mercy of the grievous miracle, whether for its punishment or its forgiveness.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it does help to have that put in a bit of a proper context rather than having it so divorced from like the gameplay and the greater context of the game, I suppose. I know I said that a little bit redundantly. Hopefully that still made sense.
In ending A, we truly carry the burden of our guilt, and in doing so we evolve the thorn into more painful vines that grow as our burden grows. And our burden...
Oh yeah, and so one other thought that I had throughout Smo's explanation there would be maybe that ties into why the title is thus called Blasphemous, because blasphemy is at the heart of growing guilt, and then you could say that the higher wills taking the miracle and requiring more guilt could be because what they did themselves might be blasphemous if they took the powers of the miracle and twisted it for their own end, but I don't know.
Must be full before we have our final communion with the miracle. Firstly, we corrupt the immaculate bead by letting our guilt seep into it. The item description for the weight of true guilt, the item that the immaculate bead becomes, reads as follows. Bead completely tainted that has absorbed the sins of its wearer until completely filled. Encloses a storm of guilty and rumbles with the echoes of past mistakes. We let an immaculate bead absorb all of our sins, and when carrying it we understand the extent of our guilt. With this in hand, we are allowed to enter a series of trials underneath the confessor statues. Passing through the portals of the confessors, these trials involve tense combat and potential death and damage to our bodies and soul. When we clear a room, it gives us a message in Latin, which strictly translated means sacred oath, but can also refer to a sacred rite, and that is what we are doing here. We are consecrating our understanding of our guilt, by undertaking penance in the form of these challenging trials, and this increases our burden and so the pain that we feel through our sword and the thorn and the vines that are growing around the sword increases. The more we suffer in this journey, the more we understand the level of penance that must be taken to appease the miracle, and understand the weight of our sins before we climb the ash so it does not consume us. When the thorn has increased to the custodia of sin, our burden is complete, and as it damages us as we fight our way to the top of the ash pile, our penance has been fully realised. We understand the weight of our guilt, and thus we have taken a penance commensurate to our level of sin, and so we are allowed to climb the ash pile and have our final communion with the miracle. When we reach the top, the penitent one sits atop the throne and sacrifices himself, a final act of penance which turns him into a wooden effigy, and thus the age of penance that was brought about by this pile of ash comes to an end thanks to us undertaking the true penitence required for this age of sin to end, and our final sacrifices seals that deal. Dale Gracius notes that despite the fact the penitent one has ended this current form of penance, penance never ends, and the will of the miracle is capricious, and so we can expect for punishment to arrive in a new form in the future. But for now, this exact type of penance has been satiated by ourselves undertaking a true pilgrimage towards the ash pile. So thanks guys, that's my take on the miracle. I'm sure there's probably more that people could dig into it, but that's the overview as I see it without trying to overcomplicate it.
He whistled when he said see it. that kind of thing always kind of cracks me up. Yeah, that was a good video. I do think this probably did come out before Ending Charlie was available, which is perfectly fine, but I think obviously given the amount of information that he had on hand at the time, it still does a pretty good recap of the lore.
If you like this video and you want to see more Blasphemous content, please give me a like and a subscribe, as I will be doing more. I plan on doing a video on the penitent one himself and possibly the father. Again, I'd like to thank my patrons for helping me keep the channel going, and thanks to you guys for watching this video and helping me explore this wonderful world, and I hope you have a nice day. See you soon.
Yeah, that was cool. Let's go ahead and link it for you guys in the chat. So I wanted to look at this video particularly because I wanted to see a kind of more organic building of the lore and like working from the fundamental blocks before just kind of going in the deep end, even though I kind of, have a little bit more insight from having played both games and gotten even like the newest DLC ending to recontextualize some things. But nonetheless, I do think this was a good video. Little Church Lore says W video dub. All right, so yeah, now that we watched that one, let's go ahead and check out, I'm assuming, a more recent one with Blasphemous lore with the Twisted one, or the Twisted one with the Lore Hunter. And so this one also came out 5 years ago, which is, fine. So only like a month after. So I'm assuming still before we got more information with like Ending Charlie and whatnot. So this could be like an ongoing journey as I continue to learn more about Blasphemous. But I did contact both Smo and the Lore Hunter and ask them for recommendations of videos that I should like maybe look at first. And these were some of the results that they gave me. So, all right. With that in mind, let's go ahead and dive on in to the Twisted one.
One devout and tormented youngster asked the High Will for punishment. He placed a wooden log where he sat and prayed. He prayed hoping to be heard. He prayed for pain, so he could ease the guilt that sharply pierced his soul. Then, the miracle manifested itself. It made roots grow and twist over his arms and legs, but not a cry nor a complaint came out from his mouth. Every inhabitant of this land bore witness to, and all of them prayed before the besought eternal joy of that youngster.
There is no other figure of more singular importance in the religion of Custodia than the Father, also known as the Twisted One. He is called so because of the special nature of the cruel miracle that was enacted upon him. In the simplest of comparisons, this iconic figure plays a similar role to what Jesus plays in Christianity. The Twisted One is special because he is the symbol of what a true penitent should aspire to be. We don't know much about the man behind the myth, but we do know about the events that define him, and what his stories mean to the people of Custodia, and it is that aspect that I would like to discuss with you today. The Twisted One is central to the Penitent One's quest to their pilgrimage, as we are directed to one of his relics from the very beginning of the game by Deogracius, who says,
"The cradle of affliction is what you seek. This can be found in the mother of mothers of the churches."
The Cradle of Affliction is the product of the first miracle, and a relic of the Twisted One, their creation of which we will discuss later in the video. But by seeking this miraculous relic, and communing with the miracle, through this holy medium, we are taking a symbolic step in replacing the Twisted One as the Father. A good starting point for the discussion on the Father is the direct lore that we get given via the Kickstarter page on the lore update from May 25th, 2017. Now bear in mind, I imagine the story has evolved a little bit, so there might be some things in here that are different from what we're used to in the game, but I still find it a very interesting portion, as it reads this. The religion revolves around one omnipotent god, the Twisted One, a god typically depicted humanoid in appearance, with grossly and terribly contorted limbs. While the Twisted One is the sole god worshipped, there are lesser icons thought worthy of prestige and devotion, such as renowned virgins, saints, and infamous martyrs. I think some of the ideas here are early ones, such as the idea of one omnipotent god, yet there are some interesting ideas in this passage, such as the fact it comments on the relation or the status difference between the Twisted One and other saints that we find in the game, such as Our Lady of the Charred Visage. Suffering is what makes individuals special in the religion of Custodia. Selfless mutilation and suffering is celebrated, and it elevates people into sainthood or martyrdom, such as the case of Our Lady of the Charred Visage, which I discussed in one of my last videos, who was a beautiful lady who sacrificed her own beauty, gave it up to the miracle by burning her face, by making herself suffer, and thus she was elevated to the position of sainthood.
So yeah, I guess one other reason why I kind of do doubt the higher wills a bit more is because of the showcase of the Twisted One kind of seeming to exist beyond them, when the story kind of paints it as though the Twisted One is a byproduct of their work, I guess. It makes me, like, the vibe that I've kind of always gotten is that, like, the Twisted One is even beyond, like, the higher will's power, it seems.
However, the Twisted One stands even above these uncorrupted saints, as he almost deified himself, as Jesus was God's earthly representative. His punishment is so grotesque and violent that it is the ultimate example of martyrdom and penance. The Twisted One is often referred to as the Father. This is a title that the Penitent One will also inherit upon climbing the ash pile and communing with the miracle at the end of Ending A.
Oh, that sound effect's kind of loud.
And so we can assume that he is held in the same regard as the Twisted One after this miracle takes place, the miracle of the Penitent One turning into wood that we see at the end of Ending A. The term father here is used to evoke a feeling of paternal care or leadership or oversight. In Catholicism, priests are referred to as father, as they are spiritual leaders or caretakers of their flocks. They look after their flock in regards to their spirituality, making them a father. In Christian prayers, God is often referred to as the Father, again that sense of parental and spiritual oversight. Calling the Twisted One the Father, in the manner that Escobar does at the end of the game,
Guardian of the miracle and of the miracle banner, with great pain I carry the emblem of the Father,
is meant to indicate his spiritual importance to the church. He is the guide, the ultimate martyr, who not only acts as their spiritual leader, but as an example. He is the spiritual example that the church and the miracle hold in the highest esteem.
Bro, I didn't know that the miracle that he just used, the prayer, would actually climb onto the bottom of these platforms. That actually probably would have been really good against this boss.
The esteem at which the miracle holds him in is also reflected in the severity of his punishment and the ramifications that it has for generations to come. To truly understand why this is so important and why the Twisted One is so important to the people of Custodia, we must return to the event of the first miracle. So let's revisit the telling of it that we get in game, given that most of what we know of the Twisted One comes from the retelling of the first miracle. The most important part of the Mother of Mothers Church is the knot of the three words. The art book describes this part as the central part of the church. What this means to me is that this is the oldest part of the church, because it is the central part, the part of which the rest of the church is built around. To me, this also seems more likely if you consider the term first miracle. It is the first religious act that is tangibly felt and seen by the people of Custodia. This site is where it actually happened, and so it makes sense that a church was built around it.
Little Church Lore says they're confused why the Twisted One is called the Father and not the Son. I'm a little bit confused by that too, and I think that might have impacted my understanding of Blasphemous, the events of Blasphemous 2, because I thought the Father mentioned in relation to the Sky Child would have mapped onto the Twisted One, and then in my mind, if you have like the Mother of Mothers Church, that could have been like the mother, and then the son would have been the miracle itself, but that might not work super well with like the child that has the wing coming out of its chest. But then another thought that I do have in relation to that would be, well, then maybe the Twisted One is still the father, the unseen mother, maybe Annunziata, is still the mother, and the Sky Child, all three of these entities are just mapped onto what could have been a literal man, a literal woman, and a literal child, or maybe a wet nurse, depending on one's interpretation of that event, and could just be representations of like the original pseudo creation myth of this like kind of religion. But yeah, I've been kind of wondering that now as well, like the whole like father epithet thing.
And then it would become the central church of a much larger cathedral. The architecture of the knot of the three words is very different from the rest of the Mother of Mothers Church. According to the art book, the influence for the architecture here is the Mosque of Cordoba, and this is completely different from the influence that inspires the rest of the Mother of Mothers Church. And to me, this is to illustrate that this part of the church was built in a different time period from the rest, hence the difference in design and architecture. This is the original core, the more ancient core of the church, of which the rest was built around it. When we reach here in game, we again find Deogratius, who is ready to tell us more about the miracle. This time he stands before the knotted tree with the three roots, the site of the first miracle, and he says this.
Or just to build off of what Noah Hokai is saying, maybe that it could be meant as father in a Paul sense, like he's the father of the church, not necessarily like the religion itself. That might work. Robbie, you spent 120 hours on this game? How many did I spend? Probably like 18, something like that. 20. So what Mao says, that doesn't necessarily contradict my idea that if we see those people up in heaven, that doesn't mean that they still didn't receive like a blessing to go there. But I still think that the idea of the mother and the father and the Twisted One could have just been like symbolized in what happened to those actual physical people. So trying to think of a good parallel example to explain that idea. Okay, so like the same way that Jesus kind of represents the Father and the Holy Ghost as one being in man, then I think the earth, the Custodia Father, the Custodia Mother could have been like the equivalent of Jesus for this kind of a Custodia religion, which is kind of funny that we never even really get a name for it now that I think about it.
Here is where the first miracle took place. One devout and tormented youngster asked the High Will for punishment. He placed a wooden log where he sat and prayed. He prayed hoping to be heard. He prayed for pain, so he could ease the guilt that sharply pierced his soul. Then, the miracle manifested itself. It made roots grow and twist over his arms and legs, but not a cry nor a complaint came out from his mouth.
His punishment, in a twisted way, is a sign of favour of the High Wills. It shows that the High Wills singled him out for a special punishment. There's also a knotted tree with 3 roots that grew in the place of this great punishment. A tree that hot liquid gold seeps out of, as if to remind the people every year that this is where the first miracle took place, and that they must remember the lessons of the first miracle. This is actually miraculous, a gold sprouting tree that has grown from the corpse of a martyr, and it is a permanent reminder of the will of the miracle and its demands. This is also when the Cradle of Affliction, the Holy Grail, was created, or at least conceptualized. At the end of the game, Deogratius refers to the creation of this relic. Again, if you didn't see the parallels, this is of course the same as the Holy Grail in Christianity, which collected drops of blood of Christ as he was crucified on the cross.
And for what it's worth, I am really skeptical of even Deogratius' claims about like prayers to the higher will, because I feel like that kind of information is part propaganda on behalf of the church, or at the very least it's compromised. And I would definitely feel differently about this if we weren't given that line about things preceding the higher will itself. But for me personally, that kind of makes me wonder then, when exactly did the higher wills come into being? And then why was this not always the kind of indigenous religion of Custodia? Because we're told of like the skeletal remains in the ossuary and whatnot, and the kind of indigenous religion not being the original religion of Custodia as we know it.
Likewise, a cup was used to collect the blood of the Twisted One, creating this holy relic. It is possible that the gold that is flowing from the tree is a continuation of this first blood, this first drop of gold that came from the head of the Twisted One. This grail, this cradle of affliction, captures the essence of the Twisted One. It is all that's left of him, because in a way, the fluid that was captured in the cradle of affliction came from the act of the miracle itself, and therefore preserves it for all this time.
Oh yeah, and then Proximo, if that's the baby's name, also seemed to be like part of a different entity than the higher wills and was kind of being punished for it. And he may or may not be related to the bull and or the moon, and I don't know exactly how that maps onto the higher wills. I almost keep calling it the greater will.
It therefore makes a lot of sense that the penitent one would be able to commune with the miracle through this holy medium, as it contains part of the miracle itself. This also makes me reconsider the relevance of gold in the religion of Custodia. Chrysanta has an armour plate made of gold, as she refers to it as gold in the comic, the kneeling, and Escobar specifically refers to his sword as a sword of gold.
Now may your sword full of guilt with mine of gold collide.
It is possible that this is meant to reference the gold that came from the first miracle. Perhaps it is even made from the gold that flowed from the tree. It doesn't really add much to the Twisted One's background, but it is another nice tidbit that allows us to understand how important the Twisted One is to every facet of this religion. Even the knot of the 3 words is a reminder of the pious acceptance of one's guilt that is set as an example by the Twisted One. For it is meant to represent not only the 3 knotted roots of this tree, but also the last 3 words that the Twisted One uttered.
This triune tree that sprouted years after his death was named the Knot of the 3 Words. For 3 are its twisted trunks, and 3 were the words spoken by that youngster before he died. My great guilt.
Yet despite this pain,
I like how Smo's clip back here was like looping every 2 seconds with him jumping.
Deogratius reports that the father never uttered a cry, that he was silent in his acceptance of his pain and suffering. We can assume that no cry or utterance is supposed to represent pious acceptance of the miracle's will. We know that there were witnesses to this first miracle, as the lore of the key to the chamber of the eldest brother reads as follows. I hear his lament, the one who is believed mute from the beginning, since there were witnesses to the first miracle, the afflicted one who asked for punishment and had it granted to him. We again get reference to the silent manner by which the father suffered his fate, and this aspect of suffering is important to the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow. Yet there's something else in this passage from the key to the chamber. It tells us that although the father is believed to have been mute, the eldest brother of the Silent Brotherhood could hear our father's lament. To me, this emphasises how powerful the Twisted One's sacrifice is. He did feel great pain, and he did lament for what was lost. But instead, he gave his life to the miracle, and it is the duty or the penance of the eldest brother of the Silent Sorrow to remember the fact that the Twisted One did feel pain, lest we forget his suffering. And though why his brothers take a vow of silence to replicate the way in which the father suffered, he must always hear the lament of the father. That is his punishment. The Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow, who I spoke about in more detail in my Penitent 1 video, and again I will link that below, but to remind ourselves, they take the silence of the father, the silent way in which he suffered his fate, is their central tenet by taking a vow of silence, as is described by Desamparados in the comic The Kneeling. His importance to them is reflected by the massive idol that we see within their church at the beginning of the game. This image is important to all facets of the religion in Custodia, however, not just to the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow. We see it used in punishment. There are people crucified in the same manner as him, as if those who are guilty are supposed to feel the suffering, or at least a morsel of the suffering, that the Father did. To help us understand the symbolism of the Father's image, I have invited my good friend, the Lore Hunter, onto the channel to help describe this for us, and give us
I was wondering if the Lore Hunter was going to show up at all.
his take on things. Take it away.
Hello, Sean of the Lore Hunter here. So Smo approached me about collaborating on a Blasphemous video with him, and knowing how much we love putting up quotes on defocused backgrounds, he asked, Sean, extremely handsome and smart man, do you have any good quotes from the developer about the iconography of the Twisted One? And I said, Smo, my sophisticated, dulcet-toned friend, of course I do. As the crucifix represents Christianity, the religion of Custodia needed a symbol to represent it that would be easily recognizable and represent the religion thematically.
Bro, I didn't know he was actually in the symbol itself. I thought the symbol was supposed to represent his body. That's kind of cool.
In the Art of Blasphemous, developer The Game Kitchen describes where the idea for the symbol of the Twisted One came from. The original idea for the symbol came from imagining the result of twisting a square as if it were in a wire in such a way that the resulting geometric figure simulated the figure of a person with flexed arms and legs. Laid within the symbol is the image of the Twisted One, a man in a similarly twisted position set against a trunk, with his limbs transforming into roots and wrapping around the trunk. The position of the Twisted One and his transformation represents his punishment by the miracle, while simultaneously evoking Christian crucifixes depicting Christ being crucified. Speaking of crucifixes, the Game Kitchen was inspired by Spanish folklore and art in creating Blasphemous. Gratuitous side note, I actually made a whole video about it. And the ornamentation for the symbol of the Twisted One came from the Spanish classic Indiana Jones. Okay, so they were inspired by a non-Spanish movie for the ornamentation, but the source of the inspiration in the movie was the Coronado Cross, a fictional crucifix named after a real Spanish explorer, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado. In Blasphemous, the miracle twists. It takes the people of Custodia's hearts and minds and twists their physical form to make manifest those internal thoughts and desires. Chief among them is the Twisted One himself, whose body is twisted and transformed by the miracle. This act of twisting is made manifest as a symbol of the Church of Custodia by twisting a square to form something akin to a figure 8 or infinity symbol. Setting the Twisted One within this twisted square breaks the symmetry, the order of the symbol, in the same way that the transformations of the miracle are chaotic and so disorder. This also sets within the infinite circuit of the symbol an icon of punishment, which to me describes the cycle of penance that the miracle will continue to inflict without end upon Custodia. And on that helpful and uplifting note, back to you, Smo.
Yeah, the symbol does kind of have that infinite type of iconography, which is, almost like the infinity symbol, just not put sideways. Well, or it is the infinity symbol, but a sideways infinity symbol, which just looks like an 8.
Thanks for that, Lore Hunter. If you like lore and you like Blasphemous lore and you like Dark Souls lore, you should definitely check out the Lore Hunter, and I will leave his links below. As the Lore Hunter says, the iconography of the Twisted One is generally meant to depict his punishment and be representative of the twisting of his body. But more generally, it is representative of the miracle and what it demands. It is a reminder of what the Twisted One did and what the High Wills expect of us.
So Little Church Lore says it's the perfect symbol to represent God, eternal, infinite. And now that I think about it, it does kind of resemble the Jesus fish, doesn't it?
I also agree with the Lore Hunter that the image of the figure of 8, or the kind of infinity loop, is meant to represent the never-ending cycle of penance. Remember what Diogratius says at the end of Ending A, that penance doesn't ever end, it can only take a new form. And so at the end of the game, when we sacrifice ourselves, we are only ending this particular type of penance, and the cycle will continue anew.
And here I am, feeling like I'm chuckling, and I get to laugh at these fools who cannot see into the future to know that your penance can indeed come to an end.
And now, following that cycle, the miracle needs a new sacrifice. It needs a new penance. A new willing penitent is needed, desperately needed, to end this age of corruption that we are in. And so we proceed to seek the cradle of affliction, the remains of the Father before us, of the age before us, of the cycle before us. And the Father's sacrifice lives on, because it allows us to commune through his sacrifice, through his blood, to commune with the miracle, and make a new sacrifice to end this particular cycle of penance. The Penitent One is crowned the new Father at the end of the game, because his ultimate fate mirrors that of the Twisted One. It's just a new martyr for a new age. They even are both killed or affected by roots. It is the same manner. Almost. While the Twisted One was twisted and broken by roots that grew around his body, the Penitent One painfully transforms himself into wood. But like the Twisted One, he does not utter a sound. He suffers the same way the Twisted One did, and he therefore completes the mission or the beliefs of the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow, who obviously believed that the silence of the Father was key to ending this age of penance. This is a great miracle, as great as the first miracle, and so Diogratius and others name us the new Father. So ultimately, by looking at our own journey, we can
Yeah, I do think the video would be made a little bit stronger if Smoughtown reinforced that silence kind of implies tacit acceptance. He did bring that up earlier, but I think it would just do a little bit better to remind us here as well.
Begin to understand the Twisted One's meaning. He was the one who understood what the miracle needed, what it demanded, and he was rewarded through punishment and canonized as one of the great works of the miracle. So there we have it, guys. That's mine and the Lore Hunter's take on the Twisted One. And so yeah, I'd like to give a really special thanks to the Lore Hunter to agreeing to collaborate with me on this. It's great to have him on board. And again, I reiterate that you should really check out his channel, guys. It has good content. It's, same demographic as mine, looking at lore, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, everything that you'd really need. So check it out. I'll leave the links below, and I really appreciate that. If you want more Blasphemous content, then please consider dropping a like or subscribe to the channel, as I will continue to look at Blasphemous. I've got a couple of announcements coming out at the end of the year about stuff that I'm going to continue to do to cover the game. If you want to see other stuff that I do, then I do write for Unleash the Gamer, the website, and I will leave links to some of my articles below. If you'd like to join the discussion with other like-minded people, consider joining my Discord, and I'll leave a link for that, as well as my Twitter, where you can see me retweet.
I didn't even know he had one. I'll need to check that out later.
Other people's clever tweets. And again, thanks to my patrons who help keep the lights on at the Smoughtown studio. I really appreciate your guys' support. And thanks to you guys for watching this video. Hope to see you next time. Have a great night.
Cool. And he also had a couple extra names in there. I saw. Good for him. So here is the link to the video that we just watched if you want to help support Smo a little bit more with a like or a passive watch, he would certainly appreciate it. Now, another good news for Smo, I think he just released a community post where he said he just finished his 200th video and he's just recently broken 250k. So kudos to him. That's truly impressive, especially when you consider the average length for his videos as well. Twitter, the site that doesn't exist anymore but refused to accept its death. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, this was before its rebranding as X. So, anyway, yeah, that was a good video. Let's go ahead and transition into the next one. I might need to queue up another one because I haven't reacted as long to these videos as I did in previous ones, so my estimation of time is off. So next we will have Aging Untouchables Creature Designer Deep Dive from the BonfireVN video by Adam Duff, Lucid Pixel. Right, here we go.
Hey guys, it's Adam from Lucid Pixel. A little while back I was surfing the internet and I happened upon the videos.
I'll turn it up slightly because it's a little bit quiet on my end, so I imagine it's a little bit quieter for you guys too.
By the YouTuber BonfireVN, who produces these incredible detailed close-up videos of a lot of Elden Ring creatures and bosses and that kind of stuff. And I immediately started to binge on his videos for several reasons that might be very obvious to a lot of you if you follow my channel. But to give you a little bit of background if you're new to my channel, I'm an art teacher, a fantasy illustrator, a creature designer who is heavily inspired and heavily involved in the whole Souls series and the Souls scene. I even just finished recording an audiobook for the book You Died, a Bible for Souls fans and stuff like that. So I'm very deeply involved in this, and this has a very big influence on my artistic style and my teaching style as well. So being able to see these creatures and models and designs very, very close up in meticulous detail wasn't only binge-worthy for me, but I got very excited with these videos as a teaching and a learning tool. So I reached out to BonfireVN directly and I said, would you mind if I make videos where from an artistic perspective, just analyzing it, both to promote his stuff, but also to help educate and entertain you guys, my fellow artists. So that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to start with one of my personal favorite creatures.
So as far as art goes, I feel like a little bit of a case study in tragedy myself because apparently I have a really good sense of observation, but I have no mechanical skill to truly express that as far as like art is concerned. At least when I was like taking art in high school, my teacher said I had the strongest observation skills in the class, but I mean, my drawings just kind of look like crap compared to other people's, mostly because I can't really draw a straight line. And of course, like a straight line is a myth in and of itself, but I think you guys get what I'm saying at. I can't seem to translate what's in my head onto paper very well, and that kind of sucks. So for all of the people that actually can do art, I am a little bit jealous and envious of, because that would have been something that I would have liked to have been better at. Not that I necessarily had any plans to like really capitalize on it, but just the idea of being able to translate like what the eye sees and the brain perceives onto paper or other mediums accurately is kind of like mind-blowing to me. Mao's bad at drawing people. Their proportions are always bad. I mean, that's a pretty common failing for a lot of students. And a lot of it really does take experience and practice. And to be fair, even though I'm like, oh no, woe is me, I can't do art, I haven't really put in the practice to get better. And of course, when I was a kid growing up, there weren't a ton of super useful and practical materials to get better at doing art on your own if you didn't kind of have a certain level of innate ability or talent to kind of use as a launching point. All right, Ask Next, you have a good night and you take care. Hopefully we'll see you next time.
I'd like to do a series moving forward. Of course, I won't produce any of these videos unless I have BonfireVN's explicit permission. So thank
you. Know what? since he's going so far out of his way to ask for explicit permission, and I have not done that for this one, I feel as though I should kind of respect his own methodology and probably stop here, even though I am interested in learning more about art and whatnot. I guess I could do a little bit more due diligence and like try to get that, even though I would believe that my reactions would fall under fair use because I'm trying to critique or learn or like share things in a bit of a more education related light. But I think I will probably stop this for now, and maybe I'll try to contact him and see if I can get more explicit permission in the future. So, all right, let's stop that there. And I don't have anything queued up next because I had intended this to be the last one, or at least I thought it could be. So I'm going to look through the list real quick to see if there's anything that has a decent amount of length to keep us occupied. So I guess this is kind of like kicking things further along downhill because I'm not exactly asking the next person for permission, but I don't know. I just feel like he's trying to be honest in a way that I feel like demands respect for his own practice. So I'll try to at least afford the same respect to him that he's affording to others. So this might be a little bit hypocritical, I understand, but uh-oh. Hey, Corin, how's it going? Yeah, I heard about that. All right, so this video has been on the list for a really long time. So let's go ahead and instead check out NPCpedia Iron Fist Alexander. And then I might need to get to that one later. Oh wow, this one's a lot louder. Let me turn this down. So NPCpedia Iron Fist Alexander by Ghost Charm. I don't think I've watched anything by them before.
Across the masterful catalog of video games made by legendary developer From Software, there have been dozens upon dozens of character studies on the archetype known as the warrior. King's Field, Armored Core, Otogi, but even more potently in their current golden age with Demon.
It's kind of surprising to see an Otogi reference in the wild here. Let's take off the auto quality.
Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and most recently, Elden Ring. Across these titles, we have seen a wide, diverse range of warrior-type characters. You got the crestfallen and forgotten, the optimistic and doomed, the sinister and cunning, the noble and ill-equipped. With all of these sort of different forms or shapes repeating from game to game, rhyming in theme and execution, but always exploring the depths of the human spirit that has vowed to fight to the very last breath in one way or another. However, I would say that of this sort of FromSoft roster of warrior variants, I do indeed have a favorite, and I would refer to them as, well, the more lovable sort. Oftentimes, these dudes are a little rotund around the waist, not entirely capable like some of the greatest heroes of the land, but never lacking in heart or courage.
Always a bit of a win as far as a video essay goes by using the Maiden in Black theme.
Kind, cheerful, and friendly sort of warrior that might need a little help along their way, but will always be there at your side as well during the steepest of challenges. And while there has been some iconic, beloved characters like this, most notably the Onion Knights from the Dark Souls games, I have a clear-cut favorite in this category, Iron Fist Alexander of Elden Ring.
It is kind of funny to me how pretty universally liked these guys are, and I'm trying to like wonder why. And then a bolt of cosmic understanding struck me out of the blue that these dudes kind of all really represent that himbo archetype, don't they? Where they're just kind of big burly dudes with hearts and potentially pots of gold.
Strange, large, sentient, and charming warrior jar. A jar full of the guts of the dead, with a personality as affable as you will find in the lands between. And a dude that is absolutely one of the most memorable characters in the entirety of Elden Ring, which is honestly really saying something. An NPC who yearns to be a hero of legend, but seems to come up just short whenever faced with a real challenge. A vessel guy who makes a real friend in you, the player, as you assist him on his journey to find his place in this mess of a world. But the story and legend of this character is far more than meets the eye. A concealed hometown, a small adorable nephew, and an epic final act of his quest. Iron Fist Alexander truly carries the heart of a warrior, and I want to cover it all right here, right now. What is it that makes this character so singularly special? What is his reason for fighting, his ultimate goal? And well, why is he a damn pot? Well, I just want to pause really quick to thank all of my...
Maybe he's a crackpot and he's off his rocker for doing all that stuff. I don't know.
Wonderful patrons who help me out so much by supporting this channel away from YouTube. I am Ghost, your host as always. Now please, grab your favorite nearby container, hold it close, give it a pet, and take my hand as we venture forth. So, as you likely know, Elden Ring is a massive game, an RPG that will take you like 100+ hours your first time through to clear, with all of these different areas, bosses, items, and surprises around every single corner. Quite simple.
Yeah, I kind of felt a lot of pressure playing through Elden Ring the first time around, because I was like 40 hours in, and I was screwing around in Caelid, and it felt like so many people were like advancing farther than I was in the game in the same amount of time, and I was afraid that like things are going to be incrementally spoiled more and more for me as I continued to play. So it was a little bit of a rough time, but at my 40-hour mark, I'm like, man, I don't even feel like I'm at the halfway point of the game, and I've already spent 40 hours. This is kind of crazy. And then I don't remember how long it took me to complete my first playthrough. I guess I could like look at my footage or my save files to probably figure it out.
Simply, it's an epic experience, and this game world, the lands between, is a setting in a sort of beautiful cataclysmic transition when we, the player, first come along. The different storylines, the characters, gods, and forces kind of positioning for power is very much representative of the sort of instability here. And to add to that weight on your shoulders, everyone is very much wanting your personal attention as the player carves through this rotting world to eventually become the new Elden Lord and ultimately decide the fate of everything. I would even say at times it's a little too much, dude. So you know what's really nice? What's nice is that Alexander's story and presence isn't about any of that hubbub. And as funny as it sounds, this talking can actually gives you a bit of a break from like the cosmic scale narrative and brings it down to a much more digestible and human level. But
damn, so no Hokai spent 80 hours and they got a glitch where if you hit a cutscene, the game would crash. You never beat it. Were you playing on console or PC? Did you ever consider verifying the integrity of the files or uninstalling and reinstalling PC? Man, because that would definitely suck. It's definitely a game worth finishing, I think. So Without Horns knows the pressure about spoilers, but Mao just doesn't care about spoilers, so you don't know the pressure. For me, it's like you only get a first experience of something one time, and so it kind of feels nice to experience it all organically without having my expectations messed with by outside forces and not getting bothered by outside pressure. And so like when I was playing through Blasphemous 2 in the New Game Plus and the DLC had just come out, even though it kind of objectively sucks in a way, I don't regret going through and saving my Mark of Martyrdom points, even though they were effectively useless for what I was trying to save them for. And I think it also made for a bit of good content for you guys. That moment I made the realization that, oh no, I've just been kind of punching myself in the balls playing through this game the way that I was for essentially no reason. So I don't know. I think there's kind of value in kind of attaining that firsthand experience for oneself. But of course, that's just for me, and people are free to do what they want to do. It's only for that save? That's an even weirder bug. That sucks. Without Horns had a glitch on their first playthrough. You were doing a maidenless run and you ended up getting a glitch that locked you out of multiplayer. Took you a year before you picked it up again after that. Oh, wow. I probably wouldn't have even noticed because I was playing offline for my first playthrough just because I didn't want to deal with all the annoying pop-up messages everywhere.
Hold on now, boys, because I think we should just address the elephant in the room. I mean, what the hell am I looking at here? And beyond just Alexander, in Elden Ring we find an entire subrace of beings known as, well, living jars. So I see this video, additionally, as a wonderful opportunity to dig into these guys a bit, try to get an idea of who and how and why they even are. So, the living jars are scattered all throughout the game world and come in various different sizes, most commonly friendly and less outwardly provoked. And I remember, I'm sure you do too, when the game first launched, the jar people were a huge visual draw and talking point for fans around the world. I mean, the sheer creativity and absurdity with their appearance alone is absolutely alluring, and it only gets more fun when you meet some of these characters, especially.
Yeah, I think the jar folk were essentially like the equivalent of Mimikyu for From Software. For anybody who has no idea what the hell a Mimikyu is, it's a Pokemon that's essentially designed to be a knockoff Pikachu, but intentionally so, because Pokemon has had like a number of knockoff Pikachus with like Minoon, Plusle, and whatnot. But Mimikyu is essentially a ghost Pokemon that has like a sheet that has like a really crappy Pikachu face drawn on it, and for some reason people will like just fell in love with it. I'm a big fan of its design as well, because I'm kind of always been a big fan of mimics, and I think the jar folk kind of have a similar vibe going on.
Alexander himself, but more on that in a second. So Elden Ring seems to draw influence from all sorts of real-world traditions and cultures, mythologies, and brands of storytelling, but especially Celtic and Norse stuff. So for me, these jars, honestly, have always stuck out in a pretty big way as rather different from those thematic surroundings. However, I think the more you dig into the design of Elden Ring's world and story, you see how well it pulls little ideas and concepts from so many different IRL sources, and then compiles them into one massive world that really feels culturally diverse, historically nuanced, and endlessly interesting. Now, that's all to say, the first thing that comes to mind with these jar people as far as inspiration is canopic jars of ancient Egypt. Jars that were filled with the innards of the dead in the mummification process, right? We all learned about that in school. And these were things that were for thousands of years seen as extremely important spiritual symbols of a person's passing, especially.
So I don't know if that line about learning about them in school was sarcasm or if it was like heartfelt, because I didn't learn about these in school, and obviously don't think he thinks that every school taught about them, and so this could have been tongue-in-cheek. But yeah, I ended up learning a lot more about ancient Egyptian mythology and like archaeology from watching like the History Channel documentaries as a kid than anything I learned from school. I remember getting into an argument with the teacher one time because she was trying to say that the pyramids were built by slaves, and I was trying to tell her they actually also had like labor workers and like foremen and stuff who are not just all entirely slaves, and she like didn't want to listen to it. So anyway, no, we learned about the mummification process, but we didn't have, this was never covered in my public school education. Actually, I don't even really remember a lot of like actual dedicated topics to ancient Egypt. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm sure we probably had something somewhere, but I probably didn't pay too much attention to that in school because it just wasn't very great.
A person of some sort of influence or power.
Hey Zafe, how's it going? Not a lot, but that guy's cadence makes you feel like you're watching one of those top 10 list videos. I can see what you mean by that. That's an interesting way of saying it. And for what it's worth, a lot of people weren't fans of my cadence in many of my earlier videos. I'm trying to get better about it. It's really a deliberate process. Since you're also a content creator, how do you feel about the whole voice recording process? Because I have to deliberately slow down and articulate to a point where it feels really unnatural. And because of that style of delivery, I feel like I have to be a lot more emotive in my voice to try to mimic the delivery in my head versus what I'm doing with my voice, and it just doesn't work. Like, the dude in my head is way better of an orator than I will ever be. You're the same? Okay.
And a way for the living to do their part in ensuring safe passage to the afterlife for the departed. Now, I see that as the main possible inspiration because here in Elden Ring, as we mentioned at the top, these living jars, including Alexander, are walking around absolutely full, filled to the brim with what else but corpses. As grim as it sounds, guts, innards, untold amounts of them, multiple deceased, mashed inside to a sort of raw meat putty that grants these guys life and seemingly personalities, wants and needs, wishes and dreams, all of the things that make the living, well, alive. And the personality of each pot comes from the very souls that their vessel bodies are holding. The consciousness of those dead living on in some sort of strange fragmented way in these new forms, even being passed to the next pot when a certain living jar's time has come to an end. I mean, it's pretty damn cool, but I want to be clear that they are far from just animated ghost canisters. So take a look at the description for the companion jar talisman. Though the jars are brought to life by human flesh and blood, they are all rather kindly folk. Perhaps they were made to be better than their innards.
And I think this description works a lot better with the inclusion of the DLC, hinting that a number of these jar folk were essentially crafted from the innards of sinners, aka criminals and prisoners and whatnot. So anyway, Platinum Chip, welcome back to the stream. How you doing?
Suggesting that they are more gentle in spirit than the humans within them once were.
Oh yeah, I forgot. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is, I don't remember which item description talks about it, but in 1.0, the living jars are said to be part of a experiment in immortality. Maybe if I just look up immortality real quick, I might be able to find it. So give me one moment here. Nope. All right. Well, I'll just play the video and then maybe I'll pause it again if I find it.
Their innards, suggesting that they are more gentle in spirit than the humans within them once were. So it seems to me there's another layer here of being, making this strange subrace a docile, community-oriented, and largely peaceful people regardless of their contents. But that then begs the question, why do they exist at all? I mean, is this some sort of like necromancy or a natural occurrence? Were they built for a specific purpose? Well, of course, dudes, we are talking about From Software here, masters of the cryptic and interpretive lore, so I'm sorry to say, there's no answer to the questions I just asked, but there is, of course, fun little clues to concoct a guess with. So, taking a look at any of these jars, you will notice the obvious massive red seal on top, which holds a nice image of the Erd Tree. So, if you haven't played Elden Ring, the Erd Tree is this massive, beautiful, glowing, mystical tree that towers over the entire game world. It is.
So yeah, I do think that this video came out before the DLC because this was in my list for a long time. Yeah, so this came out over a year ago. So he won't be able to talk about the difference of the sigils on the pots in the DLC or even anything about the DLC, obviously. So yeah.
Is representative of the power of the Elden Ring and the Golden Order of the Lands Between. Now, I won't get too deep into it here, but the Erd Tree is a vitally important story element of this
Oh no, I haven't seen that one before, the Herb Tree. That's great.
game, as is, of course, the Elden Ring. But long before the game's events, the Elden Ring, a mysterious kind of concept itself, was shattered. It was once a collection of interlocking runes that established the law of the world, so when it was destroyed in the shattering, the Erd Tree too was changed. Then you got these little golden seeds falling from it all
Erd Tree 2, the sequel.
around the lands between, sprouting small saplings and eventually what are known as minor Erd trees. And
Oh no, I was too busy memeing about what the auto caption. What did he actually say? Let me back it up a little bit further.
blocking runes that established the law of the world, so when it was destroyed in the shattering, the Erd Tree too was changed. Then you got these little golden seeds falling from it all around the lands between, sprouting small saplings and eventually what are known as minor Erd trees. And buddy, let me tell you, all along the base of these smaller trees are countless broken, empty living jars.
All right, so this is one of those parts of the lore which is very contentious, and many people have different feelings on this. So it is not guaranteed that the minor Erd trees were sprouted from the golden seeds. And I would argue that I think the minor Erd trees sprouted from the actual Erd tree's root system as opposed to seeds directly, and that the minor Erd trees did not first come into being after the shattering, and they are a pre-shattering phenomena, although others obviously feel differently. Corn, your phone is blown up right now, so distracting. Man, that sucks. Make sure it doesn't catch on fire. I'm assuming you're not speaking literally. The urn tree, that would actually be another good appellation for it, especially with the old death connection there. The urn tree is a herb as well, but is it a spice?
Base of these smaller trees are countless broken, empty living jars. And of course, each minor Erd tree is also guarded by one of these avatars armed with a big smashing hammer. So maybe these guardians act as like jar executioners, with each jar's fleshy innards nourishing the growth of those minor Erd trees. The jars being captured and brought here for this purpose, or maybe even the jars come here themselves to fulfill some sort of ultimate mission. I mean, we do see at the end of each little catacomb dungeon, minor Erd tree roots are finding their way in there, seeking the dead. And wherever there are mass amounts of buried corpses in Elden Ring, the living jars are always nearby as well. So I see there being an undeniable link here between the well-being of the trees and these people. But then the other main mystery is no one knows who made the jar people, how they really came to be. Maybe it was Radagon, the second Elden Lord of the Lands Between.
And of course, pre-DLC content here.
Who was devout to the Golden Order and restoring the broken Elden Ring, seeking to ensure the growth and protection of those minor Erd trees. Or maybe the mages of Raya Lucaria, simply animating the pantry for one reason or another, accidentally created a little community of rogue cookware. Oh shit! Or my favorite little theory, that this is simply a natural occurrence. The dead here being at one time stored in ritual jars instead of buried, then eventually those dead began infusing the very vessels with their spirits, sprouting new people altogether that have been forced to integrate into this dangerous world and act as ferrymen of the deceased. Listen, I don't know, but I find their origins to be fascinating, man, and I'm very glad that to this point it has been left a complete and utter mystery, so please let me know what you think down below, as always. But let's be honest here, everybody. Whenever I'm thinking about these characters, like Alexander and all his pot brothers, a question that crosses my mind is, do I think this guy could pilot a fighter jet? And for Alexander, I would say sadly the answer is probably no.
What? Cannot pilot a jet? Okay.
But guess what? I can. And with the sponsor of today's video, War Thunder, you can too. Virtually, of course. War Thunder is simply put the single most comprehensive vehicle combat video game ever made.
Yeah, so I was going to say a moment ago that
tanks,
I think
planes,
you could have used a
helicopters,
little bit of
and
extra
ships
time
in massive
to space out between
PvP
the little
battles,
segments,
with
just
each
to let
of
things
those
settle a
vehicles
little bit
being
more.
absurdly detailed down to the individual components, making playing and experiencing War Thunder extremely immersive. And dude,
you know what? Every War Thunder sponsor video should have a counter included next to it of how many days it's been since classified secrets were leaked onto the War Thunder servers.
the collection
forums,
of vehicles
whatever.
in War Thunder span over 100 years of development from the 1920s all the way up to today. Add on an in-depth customization system for your vehicles with camos, historical markings, and 3D decorations. Oh baby, this game certainly packs a real punch, boys. But I gotta say, my favorite thing about War Thunder is the dynamic and detailed vehicle damage system, with realistic impacts being dealt to actual components and crew instead of just a generic health bar. So, my friends, join me in the sky, land, and sea in War Thunder. Play right now for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, using my Ghost Charm link in the pinned comment to claim a large bonus pack with special goodies available for only a limited time. So
Quinn says that's the game they were leaked on? Wowzers. You say that like it was a one-time event. It's almost like constant. It's kind of the meme. I probably can't even count on one hand the amount of times that classified secrets were leaked onto their forums, and maybe even more than two hands. I mean, I don't really keep up with it too much at all, but it's just kind of a meme of like 0 days since the last leak on I keep almost calling it Warframe, but War Thunder.
thank you again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. But now that we kind of know what the jars are like and what they're about, it all brings us back to our dear sweet boy Alexander. So Alexander is a self-proclaimed warrior jar, a type of ceramic man with a very specialized and bloody existence. He is large, tenacious, courageous, and craves the blood and carnage of the battlefield. His innards are specifically made up of apparently great fighters, people who carried with them a sense of martial purpose and ability in life. So he, of course, embodies and projects those qualities as well. But you might be wondering,
is anyone else distracted a little bit by that music and like trying to place it like it's a slow down something that I feel like I should recognize?
if the jars are meant to carry the dead to the Erd trees, I mean, why are there warriors? Again, we don't know all the concrete facts for sure, but we do get some clues to the warrior variant pots when you look at Alexander's little hometown, a small and hidden village known as Jarburg. So Jarburg is tucked away on the eastern coast of the Liurnia region, beneath the
Okay, in my mind's eye, it kind of sounds like Moog's theme, but super slowed, but this has too few instruments to actually be that.
crest of a cliff. And this secretive location is no accident, dude, because it seems the living jars have sadly been a high priority target for poachers in the lands between, as their juicy innards as well as shards are imbued with rare magical properties, making them super valuable. And as rambunctious as these jars can be in a fight, they ultimately are built to break, making them very easy pickings. So I think somewhere along the way, warrior jars were constructed to protect their kin. They were built a little thicker, a little more durable, and filled specifically with the remains of fighters. And of course, with each enemy they defeat, these warriors would be able to add their fallen opponent to their own bloody soup within, gaining strength exponentially.
It is kind of funny that we have the different sizes of the jars, especially when we think about the context of the DLC about trying to rebirth the contents of the jars, essentially. And yeah, I guess that's really messed up that you have like the child size version, because although like the flesh of an adult and whatnot can be compacted down into fitting into a jar, and I'm sure there's like more than one individual put in there, part of me is really curious about that whole saint process. And I tend to get the vibe that the jar folk are a little bit different than the I don't know what you even call them. I'll just call them the saint things that you can see in the DLC, the ones that look like really messed up ladies, as opposed to like your stereotypical jar folk victim.
But when it comes to Alexander, instead of acting as a bouncer for Jarburg, he actually decided to leave his little hometown, his little cute-ass nephew Jarbairn, and all jardom behind for good. Because Alexander sees himself as not just a warrior jar, but a warrior.
Oh yeah, so I wanted to comment on the whole like warrior aspect. So I think before the DLC came out, this is actually a pretty interesting idea. And so it is kind of funny to me reevaluating just like some of the fundamental thoughts behind the creation of these jars, because like, yeah, why are some of these smaller than the others? So right, let's go back in.
Warrior in the truest sense, departing on a one-way ticket to adventure, death, and glory, not necessarily in that order. This is a guy who strives to better himself, to face tough enemies, and find purpose on the battlefield, fragile exterior be damned. And before we even meet him, Alexander has decided to make his way from Liurnia all the way down to Detroit. Caelid. His goal is to reach Redmane Castle, the home of the demigod Star Scourge Radon, where Alexander has heard of a festival of combat and war is soon to take place. And well, if he's on some sort of journey to be a warrior of legend, that sounds like a wonderful place to start. But unfortunately for Alexander, he runs into some trouble very early on in his trek, setting up your very first meeting.
Hello? Hello? Oh, my stars. I'm so happy to see you. I am Alexander, also known as the Iron Fist. And as you can see, I'm stuck here. Please, can you help me out of this? Just give me a good smack from the rear with something nice and big. And I'll pop clean out, I'm sure. Don't doubt.
It still kind of astounds me that I managed to do pretty much all of Alexander's quest in order blind my first playthrough. Just like the sheer luck of coming here first, then screwing around, going to the Gale Tunnel, then going to the Weeping Peninsula, then Caelid, and then to Liurnia. It's just like, what the hell? And then coming back to do the Redmane thing even later. And then going back to Liurnia to see him by the Jar Village. I think I might have missed him by Rykard. I actually can't remember. So maybe I'm lying.
No, there's no need to fret. I'm very well trained. Well played, good lady. Well played. Though that mighty wallop of yours almost spelled the end of me. Well, I'm out now, and that's what counts. Thank you.
And man, is it just me, or do you gotta love this dude right off the bat? He's so good-natured and kind, seeing humor in a moment of vulnerability and, honestly, embarrassment. I want to hug him, you know?
You know what, I never really thought about this angle directly, although there's probably some incidental coincidences between these thoughts, but I guess in some ways, the way that a jar folk person can potentially reanimate from the dead might be analogous to how Rykard reanimates from the dead as the serpent. And maybe that's why the serpents don't die, because they keep getting reanimated by their insides. Just thinking of like the whole Tanith connection, which I mean, I've definitely thought about before, but I don't know. I guess the living jar situation might make more sense as an analogy if they had like those weird goopy tendrils coming out of them, like the snake and the ulcerated tree spirits. But anyway.
Journey to the east, where I intend to further my education in the ways of war. And beyond these lands lie the scarlet, rot-blighted Caelid wilds. And upon their southern edge is Redmane Castle, in which a festival of combat is being held.
Now, this is no knock on any of the other awesome characters in this game, but none of them quite make a first impression like this guy, okay? Well, maybe the poo-poo eater, but that's another video altogether.
He eats poo-poo!
Now, really quick, I just want to highlight a huge part of this first meeting, and by extension, this specific warrior archetype in FromSoft games. So at the top of the video, we mentioned the Onion Knights of Dark Souls, and there's a few other familiar characters like that have fulfilled this lovable, strong, kind-hearted role. And right here, baby, we see one of the hallmark traits across all of these guys, their talent.
Not gonna lie, I did feel like Elden Ring was missing that crestfallen archetype and could have used its own version of the crestfallen warrior. Maybe Blackguard meets that criterion toward the end of his questline. I don't know, but not quite the same, I think. Avare is too much of a prick to be the crestfallen warrior's analog.
For getting themselves into pretty serious and often deadly pickles. If it's being stuck between swarms of enemies and needing a hand, getting swindled by patches and ending up naked in a well, or here, just literally being stuck in the ground. And I think it is a humorous but
Oh, that's kind of a missed opportunity that they didn't make patches get Alexander stuck in a ditch somewhere.
But also very appropriate trait to give an NPC like this, as it allows us, the players, to actually kind of cultivate a friendship over time in a really believable manner. It also justifies the help that they offer us in return. There's no serious expectations, tasks, or items you need to gain for these characters or anything.
Oh god, Alexander helps us fight a giant, just like the Yorm situation and Siegmeyer.
It's just a mutual relationship of jolly cooperation in a dangerous land. That's Solaire approved, baby. But it actually goes even a little bit further than that, as Alexander in the very game files of Elden Ring is nicknamed Potmire, a shout out to the onions who came before. I find that to be adorable and very, very cool. So after this first brush with Alexander, he can next be found again in Limgrave, not far off in the Gale Tunnel. It seems he's still on his way down to Caelid, but soon after he was stuck in the ground, now finds himself with another issue, a dead end.
Oh, the esteemed warrior. Where did you spring from? This was supposed to be a dead end, I'm sure of it. What's going on here? A door from thin air? Well, stranger things happen at sea, or so I'm told, but onward to the Caelid wilds. Gosh, that dead end had me rather stumped. To the festival at Redmane Castle on the southern edge of the scarlet rot-blighted Caelid wilds. Doesn't the thought just set your heart aflutter?
Now, if you're anything like me, you don't see Alexander for a while after this, because I swear to God.
Okay, so that has kind of always miffed me a little bit, that Alexander just ends up here when the dimensions of his body is bigger than the door. So I don't know if the implication is that somebody constructed the door after he like already started walking through the tunnel, and we just have no indication of that. But maybe it would have been a little bit more believable if we saw like an opened chest somewhere, and the implication would have been that he got teleported into this mine. I could buy that, but this has always just been a really weird situation for me, even by FromSoft standards. If we had a crestfallen archetype, he'd have to be in the round table hold. And no, so the first thought that I had was what's his face, the little boy guy, Dialos, but he's not entirely crestfallen quite the same way. I guess they do the crestfallen archetype maybe. No, I don't know, like even in Dark Souls 3, we had, I think the name was Hawkwood. I try not to call him Hawkshaw because that's the content creator, but I always had trouble remembering that guy's name because he doesn't really like repeat it a lot. He is kind of like the crestfallen archetype, but he just feels a little bit different at the end of his quest, and so he felt like an imposter crestfallen guy to me than the crestfallen warrior from DS1 or even what's his name in Dark Souls 2? Not Crichton. Holy crap. I can't. Salden, right? Maybe? I don't know. The little boy guy? Yeah, you know, he needs his nanny, so he's a little boy.
Now, if you're anything like me, you don't see Alexander for a while after this, because I swear to God, I tried to avoid Caelid as long as possible because of the Scarlet Rot and the big doggies. Terrible place, man. But once you finally get up the nerve to conquer this big toilet of a zone and carve a path down to Redmane, amongst other great warriors in this legendary atmosphere, we find our flagon friend preparing himself for what's about to happen.
Ah, you came. How delightful. Indeed, I thought I might find you here. By the by, do you know for whom this festival is being held? Well, it is none other than General Radahn himself. To think, I could face a great champion of the Shattering, a demigod in the flesh. Oh, God. In truth, I quiver at the thought. Such is his frightful repute. But the fear simply assures me the ordeal is worth undertaking. Be sure to get a good vantage, my friend. I, Iron Fist Alexander, do hereby vow to unflinchingly brave this ordeal.
Now, it's important to note how significant General Radahn is in the lore of the world here in Elden Ring. A demigod, a hero, perhaps the greatest warrior currently living in the lands between. It is very likely that this is Alexander's idol, and him making it all the way down here from Liurnia, that's a really big deal, man. And when you finally start said festival and challenge Radahn yourself, Alexander is one of the many summon signs you can select to join you in the fray.
Just thinking about how you summon in patches, he just stands around for a second and goes nope and just teleports back home. It's one of the best little Easter eggs, I don't know what to call it, that they made for that fight.
And for the most cinematic experience, I definitely suggest you summon them all. Shit is amazing. But once Radahn finally falls at your hand, we can see that the Iron Fist didn't fare too well in combat.
Ah, hello there. It was a battle marvelously fought. You are well and truly a champion, friend. I, on the other hand, am nothing but a crock. One hit was all it took to crack me, and for my insides to come spilling out. After that, I hid like a coward. And as such, I can hardly stand to face one such as you. But don't you think I've given up just yet. As luck would have it, there's a veritable mountain of warriors' bodies right here. If I can just squeeze this bunch down inside me, I'll be a mighty warrior again in no time. And you know, the bodies found here are exceedingly fine. Who could expect any less from the very warriors who fought in the Shattering? The greatest of all wars. Just you wait and see, friend. I'll grow even stronger. Just you wait when next we meet.
So I do like the implication of a cross-cultural pun in Alexander's guts spilling from himself and him essentially like losing his guts as a result of the fight, because in Japanese, just like how you say like it takes a lot of guts to do something in English, they have like the concept of konjo, which is literally like guts essentially, and so it's kind of used in a similar manner. So it's kind of interesting to me like how such unrelated cultures can have like say similar values for things like that. And I wonder if like the same kind of thought processes were extended even further throughout the world. So yeah, the fact that Alexander has to scoop in the innards of other warriors inside him to like regain his guts, I think is just kind of really funny. Yeah.
And damn, I just love this image, dude. Picking through the ancient remains of the Shattering, a war that happened a very, very long time ago, to try to find dregs of great warriors of old and fill himself with them. He even grabs a chunk of Radon and adds it to the mix, but it's notably quite a shift here, to say the least. I mean, this is the first time Alexander's spirit really seems broken. And I think in his eyes right now, he's failing. His body is cracked and his prospects of becoming this legendary warrior are looking pretty grim, especially in comparison to you. And I think that is a really big key here. So it makes a lot of sense that the next place you encounter him is right near his hometown of Jarburg, way back in Liurnia, stuck yet again in a damn hole.
Hello? Hello? Anyone? My thanks in advance. I know you're the woman for the job. You know what to do, Give me a good smack from behind with something nice and big. No, don't worry about my wound sustained at the festival. I'm stuck back together good and proper. Just give it your all.
Yeah, I don't think it matters, but it does intrigue me that he says like my wound as opposed to wounds, because you know, the discongruity between singular and plural between English and Japanese is just kind of always like a little bit of a smoke signal to me.
I thought I was apt to split in half. Yeah, I can feel my lower half is stuck on something. I don't think you can get me out just by hitting me this time. Perhaps there's a way to slide me out a little more smoothly.
Oh yeah, that kind of reminded me that I just kind of managed to figure that out on my own. I was really skeptical it would work, but I was like, well, oil makes you really slippery, so just for like laughs, I did it. And I think at that point, I had already had like the Godslayer greatsword on, so I was afraid that he would just like combust into flames if I hit him. So anyway, he lived, so we were all good.
Dearie me, I'm oilier than a toad. Yeah, there were countless oil jars back where I'm from, actually. And now I know what it's like to be one of them. Yes, indeed. I too have a home, though it is one to which I have vowed not to return. So, I thought I might look out from atop.
This guy should have killed the crystal lizard. Nah, but if for whatever reason you see this video, it's pretty good practice to reduce sound effects when gathering footage for content. It sucks, but it does help production.
Top the cliff. But as I drew closer and closer, pow, wouldn't you know it, I was perfectly stuck in that blasted hole. I can feel the warriors inside admonishing me for my mawkishness. To walk the path of champions, one cannot cleave to the past. I'm headed to the Fiery Mount in the north. I can strengthen myself there without fear of cracking this vessel. I will forge myself anew in its flames.
So a little oil and
I realized I said crystal lizard. I should have said a scarab. I'm a poser, guys.
Good smack later, out he pops again, and he's definitely looking a bit ragged, isn't he? Maybe he wanted to make sure his little nephew was safe, and we will get to him later, but it's kind of sweet sentiment to me that he comes back around these parts. I mean, his quest begins with shedding the safety of Jarburg to do great and dangerous things, but after all he has already seen and been through, I'm sure just being nearby soothes him in some way. And I think it's worth noting that although we see Alexander obviously start to struggle and have his confidence shaken a bit, he is far, far from inept. I mean, the various areas
I was hoping the music was over. This is starting to get like the equivalent of like bagpipes for me. I know some people enjoy the sound of bagpipes. I don't. So, yeah.
He is able to reach alone in the state the Lands Between are in is an extremely impressive feat. Bro is on a certified gamer adventure, fighting through extremely dubious zones with fearsome enemies, just like we are. And I think this is another thing mirrored with the Onion Knights of the past games. Extremely capable and brave, but at a certain point, they just hit a wall or two. So be sure you don't write off Alex here as some scrub, because this dude is a G. And next up, yes, we find the Iron Fist bathing in the comforting molten flow of Mount Gilligan.
Oh, mountain of fire! Bake me in your flames! Ah, good lady. What business might you have in such a place as this? I hardly think you're here to temper yourself with flame, considering that fleshly form of yours. Your timing, though, is impeccable as ever. I've been making just the thing for you on my journey here. Take it. I'm sure it'll suit you to a T.
Jar.
But, it's hardly more than lukewarm here. I won't be able to temper my body such that it'll never crack again. Perhaps I'll head eastward. There's an old saying I've caught wind of. Above the lofty clouds, the icy giant's peak doth soar. Here lieth the flame of ruin, which ever burning roars.
So the saying he mentions is alluding to the fact that he intends to head to the snowy mountaintops of the Giants, the one-time home of the legendary fire giants who had their flame of ruin encased in the giant forge. It's a whole other ancient storyline, of course, but I think Alexander intends to place himself within this flame hot enough to weld his cracks closed. And although we don't find the Iron Fist when we traverse this region, he can be summoned for the boss fight against the fire giant, which...
Yeah, I kind of agree with that assessment as well, since he's putting himself in lava to strengthen his body again, which is kind of interesting to me. I wonder how true to life that idea is of like reheating and cooling and reheating again. Maybe it extends beyond ceramic. Maybe that works with like the ashes of the dead. I guess maybe I should look into that, although maybe I don't necessarily want that on my search history. It's like, can you burn the ashes of the dead to make something different? And then can you burn that again to make something different even more? I don't know.
As always, helps give the encounter a much more epic scale in my opinion. Also, shout out to the boy for personally crafting this jar helmet for you. My god, is it glorious. So after making your way through the mountaintops of the Giants, you find yourself next in the cinematic and stunning crumbling Farum Azula, the ancient capital city of the dragons, which is now in ruins, guarded by beastmen and other wild creatures. I mean, what an epic backdrop, boys, because this is actually the last place we encounter Iron Fist Alexander. His long, perilous quest to forge himself into a stronger warrior concludes here in the realm of ancient dragons. But this is where his true warrior heart reveals itself, because over the course of this entire wholesome friendship, we have proven to him that we are everything he wishes to be, felling gods and legends alike with relative ease, and well, as we know, for this warrior jar, there is indeed one surefire way to become that strong.
Ah, I see you finally made it here yourself. The city hanging in the air is slowly crumbling. What an incredible place we find ourselves. But that aside, you're certainly a force to be reckoned with, eh? I doubt there's a single soul who could have handled that giant other than you. It was practically a god. Of course, I count myself, the great Alexander, among the many. Which means I've but one thing to ask of you. Would you kindly undertake my ordeal? Come and tell me when you're ready. I've been longing to fight a warrior as accomplished as you. You are ready then, I take it? Then let us begin. Hi!
The real messed up thing about this is if you attack him before he finishes his lines, you get like the worst item for the quest line. So I did some extensive like quest trigger testing to figure that out. And I would have been super salty if I just screwed that up on like a pseudo blind playthrough, or just like not having had the ability to reset my save to learn to know any better, I should say. So anyway, with that horn said, you can reheat certain materials to increase how hard they are, and they're pretty sure ceramics are one of them. That does sound right, but I guess like my actual question is like, is there a limit to that? And if so, like, where does that limit lie? And of course that doesn't really matter too much, considering ceramic pots don't suddenly start walking and talking in real life, but you know what I mean.
I'm the great Jar Warrior, Iron Fist Alexander. Lend me strength, O warriors. Let us become one champion.
I think one of the funniest facets about the Jar folk is that they're pigeon-toed. No, now that I think about it, Alexander's moveset is pretty OP for a Warrior Jar. So he is kind of like the Warrior Jar amongst Warrior Jars.
As I suspected, victory was impossible. This vessel was found lacking. My thanks. I knew you were the stuff of champions. It was a marvelous battle. I implore you, take what I bequeath from inside me. All vessels are destined to one day break. But the great Alexander lived as a warrior to his last.
It's just so brutal. Shard of Alexander, Alexander's Immense. Warrior Jar Shard.
Across all of
Alright, so rest in rip, friend. Thanks, no Hokai. So Without Horns does say that the drawback from like refiring the ceramics is they also become less flexible, which does lead them to breaking easier. Okay, thank you. I guess that makes a lot of sense. Hop on Legrand. Achilles.
human history, there have been various legends and stories that talk of the warrior's death. The idea that a person who has given their life to the art of war must meet their end in an honorable fashion on the battlefield. The Vikings believed it was the only way for a warrior to make it to Valhalla. The Romans and samurai would sooner fall on their own sword than succumb to disease or being captured. And perhaps the most cinematic trope in all of fiction adjacent to this very idea is the duel to the death, an affair of honor between two individuals that don't even necessarily have any grudge or anger toward one another. But one or both of them is seeking to test themselves or die in the process. Now, if you ask me, Alexander knew with certainty he stood no chance against you. His bravado and confidence are not convincing, considering his broken body and various pickles we have seen him in. But even in death, his attitude and outlook is so positive and matter-of-fact, leaving us with a shard of his body which greatly boosts your damage output, as well as his very innards, the guts of the warriors that came before, which made up his spirit, heart, and personality. Now, I'm gonna be honest, this is a rather somber quest, all things considered, but it absolutely seems that Alexander lived it to the fullest and was honored to fall at your hand. But this is not the end. So reading the description of those innards confirms that these are passed from jar to jar, meaning that perhaps before Alexander, a very similarly cheery warrior pot existed, and now it's time for these innards to be brought to the next in line. Now, we mentioned earlier how Alexander's story also involves that of his tiny jar nephew, Jarbairn. But another character that we've yet to bring up, and another one of my favorites, is a human knight named Dialos of House Hoslow. And
That's funny because I kind of hate Dialos because he's just like such a little useless dude for so long. And then even at the end of his quest, he's kind of a relatively ineffective for what he sets out to do. But I mean, there is a little bit of redemption to his story arc, so that's kind of cool. It just kind of sucks that it took so long for them to patch this quest end into the game, because I was pretty much done having explored, I think, virtually everything I could at that point. And so for me, doing the Dialos questline and the Jarbairn questline was just more of like a capstone, one and done type thing, and I haven't bothered to do it again because it's a little bit out of the way and the rewards aren't really worth doing, because by the time you defeat Alexander, you can essentially beat the entire game, so I just really don't have a ton of reason to go back there.
he has a small adjacent role here in relation to Alexander as well. So Jarbairn is quite obviously a youthful vessel, but claims that he too is constructed to be a warrior jar.
Hey, cuz, have you met Uncle Alexander? He used to live here with us, but then he left to be a champion. I asked to go with him, but he said, the path of champions must be trod alone. So heroic, right? I'm actually a warrior jar as well. One day, I'll be just like Uncle Alexander. Then I'll have to leave the village to become a champion.
So, understandably, he thinks...
Alright, Mildly, thanks for dropping in, and you have a good night as well. So, that does make me curious as to whether or not the little jar are supposed to canonically grow, but we don't really have a lot of indications for that. We don't even really have a ton of medium-sized jars, or any, do we? I mean, like, any, like, living ones. So, well, I guess if you consider the giant-ass jar outside of Caelid as being a big jar, then maybe the Alexander-sized jars are the middle ones.
Thinks Uncle Alexander is about the coolest damn jug in the lands between and eagerly awaits his return and guidance. But when you meet this little runt in Jarburg, he's actually searching for a potentate, or a ruler, a monarch and protector. Because as we stated before, these jars are often poached for their innards and prefer to have a kind-hearted human present to lead and protect them. Now, he says you would be great, but your hands are a little too rough. Okay then, dude. So he has his own little quest line regarding this and eventually meets that knight, Dialos.
My friend, it's been far too long. I have to say you caught me at a rather low point. But as you see, I've put all that behind me. Left the Volcano Manor, forging my own path now, making my own choices. Even a fool like me can look after some simple jars.
Truly an incredible character, worthy of a video to himself. And if you're progressing all these quests kind of in tandem, right around the time Alexander challenges you and falls in combat far from home in Farum Azula, Jarburg is indeed attacked by poachers. Dialos fights bravely but dies defending the place, saving Jarbairn specifically as other jars were being smashed. And after the conflict, we see Jarbairn so moved and inspired by the bravery and tenacity of Dialos, he begins to dismantle the fallen warrior's corpse and fill his vessel. And then you can inform Jarbairn of the passing of his great uncle and offer up his insides to the young warrior jar.
I'm about to go on a journey as a warrior jar, in search of glory. Wow.
Oh no, guys, we now know the final boss of the next DLC. It'll be Jarbairn, Jar reborn into something even bigger.
Cuz, are these insights from Uncle Alexander? Thank you, cuz I'm a warrior jar, so I need to be strong. I can really have them. Right? I understand. I'll get strong. Strong enough. I deserve to have Uncle's insights. I don't think I'll see you again. When I set out, warriors are supposed to work alone. Goodbye, cuz. And thanks for everything. I'll never forget you, cuz.
I think overall, there is so much that sets Alexander and the entire Jarburg questline apart from the other similar characters of the past games. Now, I'm not sure if you personally pick up on this or it's just me overthinking and overanalyzing, which hey, I tend to do, baby. But Alexander carries a much more, I guess, morally neutral energy throughout the Lands Between than, say, the Onion Knights. And at times, Alexander even comes off as a little bit bloodthirsty or single-minded, because remember, he is a warrior, not a hero, a fighter, not a knight. There's even a part of me that wonders about his overall intentions regarding the player character.
So yeah, as far as like why he comes off a little bit more morally neutral, I think, than the Onion Bros, it could be because Alexander seems to be acting mostly out of self-interest, whereas the bumbling Onion Bros seem to have more of an external mission that leads them towards the path they must ultimately follow. Maybe Siegmeyer... Wait, no. Siegvard, not as much as Siegmeyer, but at least he kind of gets fleshed out a bit further, pun intended, with Sieglinde trying to put a capstone on his questline there. But I don't want to call him like more competent than Alexander, but he does kind of charge more headlong into battle. I don't know, it's kind of a weird comparison, but yeah. I do pick up on what he's saying, though.
He befriends us, yes, but in a way that is always beneficial to him. He relies on us to get him through the world and out of really dangerous situations. And obviously, by the quest's end, he would love nothing more than to smash you into a pulp and consume your corpse to gain your strength. But I don't know. I want to believe he really was your friend, a friend that was bound to his nature. Now, I understand that my subscriber base has been asking for Elden Ring content for like over a year, and this isn't necessarily the character you all wanted first. Iron Fist Alexander isn't the largest scale NPC in this game, not even close, but he is certainly one of the most lovable and fascinating to me.
Well, outside of the bosses, he certainly is.
Iron Fist Alexander ultimately in many ways failed when it comes to his lofty goals, cracking under pressure and bursting when bested by a superior foe. But he did go on an inspiring quest. He saw the world and improved himself along the way, adding legendary remains to his innards and leaving the next warrior jar stronger than he was. So no matter what you think of Iron Fist Alexander, none can doubt the courage, the charisma, the heart, and the spirit of a warrior. It just seems all vessels are destined to one day break. Thank you guys.
It is kind of interesting, I think, reanalyzing that whole line of all vessels must one day break, considering that you fight Alexander in Crumbling Fair Missoula, and then immediately after, relatively speaking here, you should be releasing the Rune of Death and reintroducing the concept of like perhaps a natural death ? Into the Lands Between. So maybe that's a bit of a dev statement there as to like the purpose of what you need to do in that area as well.
Guys so much for watching and listening to the end. Honestly, I love this character, small as the video and concept might be when compared to my last upload. Also, check out this adorable little note my girlfriend left on my Google Doc of this script. I love her, man, she's awesome. Thank you again to my patrons, and make sure that you all check out the Ghost Charm link in the description as well as pinned comment to play War Thunder for free today. Thank you War Thunder again for sponsoring this video. Let me know other NPCs you guys would like to see covered, and I will see you all very, very soon. Until next time, peace.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that was a really nice video. Pretty well grounded and whatnot like that. So let's go ahead and link it into chat if you guys want to give Ghost Charm some support. This has been in my feed for a very long time, so it's kind of nice clearing it out. And let me see what all else they've made, because this is my first time watching them, I believe. They're almost at 250k too, so damn, it's cool. Channel update, obscure games. I hate the For You thing, although maybe I should use it for now. I'm not too interested in this stuff. Maybe just like his more recent stuff isn't fully there for me. Well, actually, I don't know. Maybe if I get another... Oh, okay, you know what? Never mind. I'll sub to him just for the soul of Chrono Cross. That deserves it. Wait, is this literally all his videos? Okay. But I don't see the... Oh. I was going to say I don't see Alexander on here. Maybe I'm just a little bit blind. Oh, because it's a lighter color. Anyway, I'll give him a sub. Seems like some cool content. And yeah. So let's go ahead and like the video as well. So, okay, folks, that'll be it for tonight's stream. I need to figure out what I want to stream tomorrow. And then starting Sunday, we will get into the attempt of a playthrough of Armored Core 6, where I will fight Balthazar on version 1.0 and then probably update after that. So, okay. Until then, next stream will be at the standard time of 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.